Right at the luxurious wedding reception, my eldest son tightly grabbed my wrist and dragged me in front of the most powerful billionaire in the shipping industry. He smirked and introduced me. "This is my analog, Dad. He only knows how to do things the old-fashioned way." The new daughter-in-law chimed in with a razor-sharp smile, downplaying my value to elevate themselves. But the billionaire completely ignored my son's outstretched hand. Staring at me in utter shock, he muttered, "So it is you, the anonymous author who saved me from that $500 million lawsuit 2 years ago. I have been looking for you for 18 months. This story starts quietly, but won't leave you unchanged. Before we go further, drop a comment. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs. Quick note: certain details have been adjusted for storytelling. The heart of the story, the message, is what I hope stays with you. My name is Russell Ashford. I was 64 years old the night my eldest son used me as a prop to impress a billionaire at his own wedding reception. Table 14. I sat alone in a rented suit that pulled slightly at the shoulders, watching Terrence and his new wife route guests across the hill country ballroom with the mechanical precision I once used to organize freight manifests. The fabric smelled faintly of industrial starch and someone else's cologne. Around me, 200 guests drank champagne beneath crystal chandeliers, while a string quartet played something expensive and forgettable. Table 14 was positioned in the corner near the kitchen doors, close enough to appear included, far enough to be forgotten. The irony was not lost on me. I started Ashford Logistics 30 years ago with truck number 14 and a handshake. Now I sat at the same number watching my son Terrence Ashford, 38, CEO of Aegis Logistics, glide through the reception in a tailored navy suit with the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no. Loretta stood beside him in champagne silk, her dark hair swept back in an elegant twist. She was 35, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who studied power the way I once studied shipping routes. They moved together like a precision instrument, Terrence greeting the mayor while Loretta scanned the room for the next priority target, both of them routing conversations with calculated efficiency. I recognized the pattern immediately. Spent 3 decades analyzing freight logistics, every truck, every route, every optimization. Tonight I watched my own son apply the same system to human beings. Guest arrivals tracked and prioritized. VIP investors directed to the head table. Mid-tier contacts held at the bar for exactly 4 minutes before being released to general circulation. Every handshake timed. Every introduction calculated for maximum return. Something fundamental was wrong, but I could not yet name it. Phyllis, my wife of 37 years, moved through the reception in a pale blue gown with practiced grace. 60 years old and still beautiful, still smiling with the perfected expression of someone who had spent decades maintaining the image of a successful Texas family. She stood beside Terrence near the champagne fountain, laughing at something a board member's wife said, her hand resting lightly on our son's shoulder like a trophy on display. 3 seats away from me sat Kellan, my younger son, 35 years old, warehouse operations manager, wearing a simple gray suit that cost a tenth of what Terrence spent on his boutonniere. Quiet. Unremarkable. The kind of man people forgot was in the room even when he held the answer to every question they were asking. He stared at his water glass, turning it slowly on the tablecloth, watching condensation rings appear and disappear. I wanted to speak to him, tell him something, but the distance between 3 seats felt like 30 miles of bad road, and I did not know what words could cross it. How long does it take for a father to become irrelevant in the empire he built with his own hands? The kitchen doors swung open behind me, releasing the smell of catered beef and steamed vegetables. A server in black and white rushed past, carrying a tray of empty champagne flutes. The ballroom buzzed with conversation, deals being discussed, connections being forged, money changing hands in the language of compliments and business cards. I built Ashford Logistics by reading the flow of every system. Tonight, for the first time in 30 years, I did not recognize the flow running through my own family's room. Then Terrence's eyes locked onto mine across the ballroom. He said something to Loretta. She nodded once. They began moving toward me in tandem, cutting through clusters of guests with the smooth efficiency of people who owned every space they entered. My son reached table 14 and gripped my wrist without asking permission. His fingers locked around the bone like I was cargo to be moved. "Dad," he said, not quite smiling, "there's someone you need to meet." He pulled me to standing. The fabric of my rented suit bunched awkwardly at the shoulders as I rose. Phyllis glanced over from the champagne fountain, her practiced smile flickering for just a moment before returning to its perfect shape. Terrence led me across the ballroom toward the head table where Stanley Blackwell stood holding a glass of scotch. 65 years old, the billionaire founder of Blackwell Freight Systems who owned half the commercial shipping routes in Texas. Dark suit, no tie, silver hair cut military short, a man who judged people by their systems, not their smiles. Loretta fell into step beside us, her champagne silk gown whispering against the parquet floor. She leaned close to Terrence, her voice pitched low, but clear enough for me to hear. Remember what we discussed. Keep it brief. He doesn't need the full history. We stopped beneath the largest chandelier in the ballroom directly in front of Stanley Blackwell. The light caught in the cut crystal above us, throwing fractured rainbows across the polished floor. Terrence released my wrist and extended his hand toward the billionaire with practiced confidence. "Mr. Blackwell," Terrence said, his voice carrying the warm authority of someone closing a deal. "I'd like you to meet my father, Russell Ashford, the founder. He built the company back before GPS existed, so he's a bit analog. But we wanted you to see where Aegis came from." Loretta stepped forward, her smile bright and sharp as surgical steel. "We greatly appreciate your historical contributions, Dad. Of course, the younger generation handles the technical complexity now. The algorithms, the optimization systems, that's where the real value lives." She placed her hand on Terrence's arm, a gesture of unity. My son's fingers were smooth and uncalloused. I remembered when they were small enough to wrap around my thumb. Both of them waited for Stanley Blackwell to laugh. He did not. The billionaire lowered his glass of scotch slowly, the amber liquid catching chandelier light. His gaze moved from my face to my shoulders, taking in the cheap fabric of my rented suit with its industrial starch smell and awkward fit. Then his eyes locked back onto mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. Long enough for the confident curve of Terrence's jaw to tighten. Stanley Blackwell did not look at my son's outstretched hand. He looked at me. Only at me. Like a man who had been searching for something across a crowded room and just found it standing 3 feet away wearing a rental suit that smelled like someone else's life. His expression was not surprise, it was recognition. And something else. Something that looked almost like relief. The expression of a man who had been watching a family from a distance for a very long time, waiting for one of them to finally look back clearly. And I had never met this man before in my life. Stanley Blackwell did not take my son's outstretched hand. He looked past Terrence entirely and spoke directly to me. "So it is you," he said. "Warehouse dispute, Beaumont Port, 2 years ago. That anonymous legal brief that saved $500 million in litigation, that was you." The chandelier hummed above us. Terrence's hand remained frozen mid-gesture. Loretta's eyes flickered with something I had never seen before, fear. "I have been looking for you for 18 months, Mr. Ashford. Stanley continued. "Walk with me." He turned toward the terrace doors without waiting. I followed. Behind me, Terrence's voice pitched too high. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm not sure what my father—" "Your father understands more about logistics systems than everyone in this room combined," Stanley said without turning, "including you." The glass doors closed behind us. November air hit my face cool and clean. The hotel terrace overlooked Hill Country Lake, dark water reflecting scattered lights. Through the doors, I could see Terrence, Loretta, and Phyllis standing beneath the chandelier watching. Stanley walked to the stone railing, his back to the ballroom. 2 years ago, Blackwell Freight was sued over a warehouse lease dispute in Beaumont. Port Authority claimed we violated load-bearing restrictions. My legal team said we would lose. Settlement would cost $500 million minimum. He turned to face me. Then, an anonymous brief appeared in my attorney's inbox. 38 pages proving the Port Authority's engineers miscalculated foundation specifications by a factor of 3. Case dismissed in 4 days. I've been searching for the author ever since. I remembered that brief. Wrote it over a weekend from a library terminal while Phyllis thought I was at a freight conference. I had no stake in Blackwell's survival. I just could not watch someone lose $500 million because incompetent engineers refused to admit they had forgotten dynamic load redistribution. "Why did you send it?" Stanley asked. "Because the math was wrong," I said, "and wrong math kills people in systems like ours." Stanley studied my face. Wind moved through the live oak overhead, carrying the scent of limestone and distant rain. "I need you to look at something. Your son's company, Aegis Logistics. The acquisition appears clean, perfect metrics, flawless integration plans, exactly what I would pay $100 million for." He paused. "The numbers are perfect, Mr. Ashford. Real systems have friction, real freight has delays, weather interruptions, driver errors. Your son's operational metrics look synthetic, like someone designed them to pass inspection rather than reflect reality." The lake below us was completely still, dark water like a mirror. It looked like logic. It looked like a system functioning exactly as designed. but real water moved. Real systems breathed. You think Terrence is lying, I said. I think someone is, Stanley replied. I need a shadow audit, root access to raw manifest logs, not sanitized reports. Someone who can read logistics data line by line looking for what is not there. He pulled out his phone, unlocked it, held the screen toward me, an encrypted file transfer interface ready to send. Why me? I asked. You have teams, forensic accountants who specialize in acquisition due diligence. Because they are inside the blast radius, you are not. And because the man who can identify foundation miscalculations in a 17-year-old warehouse is the same man who can find ghost freight in a startup claiming to move 2,000 pallets a day. Ghost freight, the oldest logistics fraud, report shipments that never moved, invoice for trucks that never rolled, generate revenue from manifests existing only in databases, insurance covers losses, the company shows profit. Everyone wins until someone checks actual warehouse counts against digital records. Give me root access to the raw manifest logs, I said. Not summaries, not executive dashboards, the actual line item freight movement data, by morning. Done, Stanley pressed send. You have 48 hours until contract signing. After that, Aegis becomes part of Blackwell Freight and any fraud becomes my liability. He extended his hand. Your son is getting married tonight. I am asking you to investigate whether he built his empire on lies. That is not a small thing to ask of a father. I shook his hand. His grip was firm, calibrated. If the numbers are synthetic, someone in that ballroom knows it, I said. They are either complicit or covering for someone who is. Find out which, Stanley said, before Sunday morning. I walked back through the ballroom without stopping. Phyllis stepped forward, mouth opening. I shook my head once. Her expression shifted to resignation. She stepped back. Terrence and Loretta stood near the champagne fountain, surrounded by investors. My son's eyes found mine. He raised one hand, a wave or question. I did not stop walking. I walked away from my son's wedding without saying goodbye. The clock on my truck dashboard showed 9:47. I had 48 hours and 13 minutes left. The hill country highway was dark and empty headlights cutting through November night. On the passenger seat, my phone buzzed. I pulled to the shoulder. Access codes to Aegis Logistics. Route level permissions. Time-stamped 9:52 p.m. The 48-hour countdown had officially started. I pulled back onto the highway, accelerating toward Houston. I was about to audit the company my eldest son claimed to have built. And I already knew what I would find in those manifest logs. I just did not know yet how deep the lie went or who else in my family was helping him maintain it. The 12th floor office of Ashford Logistics was dark, except for the blue glow of 3 monitors and the distant lights of Houston's port sprawling below my window. 11:30 at night. My son's wedding reception was still happening 60 miles north in hill country, champagne-flowing investors networking, Terrence and Loretta dancing their first dance as husband and wife. I logged into the Aegis system using the root credentials Stanley sent. The authentication screen dissolved, replaced by raw database architecture. No executive dashboards, no sanitized summaries, just the skeletal framework of freight manifests stretching back 18 months. The office smelled like old coffee and the faint citrus of industrial cleaning fluid. The cleaning crew had finished hours ago, leaving vacuum tracks in the carpet and the fluorescent emergency exit signs glowing green in the hallway. I started with the warehouse movement logs. 3 locations, Dallas, San Antonio, Beaumont. Standard triangular routing for Texas logistics. I pulled freight manifests for the past 6 months and sorted by timestamp. The pattern appeared within 20 minutes. Virtual freight moving between warehouses at 2 to 4 a.m. Perfect intervals. 53 minutes between Dallas and San Antonio, 47 minutes San Antonio to Beaumont, 51 minutes Beaumont back to Dallas. Identical pallet counts, identical weight distributions. A perfect circle of cargo that existed only in databases. 30 years analyzing freight systems taught me one absolute truth. Real cargo does not move like clockwork. Real cargo breaks down, gets delayed, reroutes for weather. Real drivers take bathroom breaks, stop for coffee, miss exits. Real loading crews work at human speed, sometimes efficient, often not. This was not freight. This was code pretending to be freight. A ghost circulating through my son's warehouses like blood through a corpse, generating invoices and insurance claims for pallets that never existed. I traced the authorization codes. Every ghost movement required supervisor approval. The login credentials authorizing all phantom shipments, L. Ashford. I pulled the employee directory. Loretta Ashford, Strategic Operations Analyst, hired March 2023. Except the account creation date showed different metadata. The L. Ashford login was created 14 months ago, November 2021, 2 months before Terrence proposed. She had built the ghost inventory system before she even married into the family. How long does it take to realize you built your empire on a foundation you never bothered to inspect? 40 years building Ashford Logistics. 37 years married to Phyllis. 2 sons I thought I understood. And I was sitting in my own headquarters at midnight discovering my daughter-in-law had been systematically defrauding my son's company since before the engagement ring. I switched to the second monitor and opened the Aegis proprietary routing algorithm the innovation Terrence claimed made his company worth acquiring. The source code loaded in cascading Windows gate logic exception handling load optimization modules. I recognized the structure instantly. The architecture was identical to Kellan's warehouse planning draft from 3 years ago. Not similar. Identical. The gate logic that determined priority routing, same variable name, same conditional branches. The error handling that managed failed shipments, same recursive loops, same timeout thresholds. Even the comments in the code matched Kellan's writing style. Lowercase minimal punctuation, technical precision. Recursive check ensures no orphan manifests in secondary queue. I scrolled to the load optimization module, line 847, the payload calculation that determined truck weight distribution. The algorithm calculated cargo weight and balanced loads across available vehicles. The error was still there. 0.3% miscalculation when trailer weight exceeded 82% capacity. Kellan had mentioned it 3 years ago when he showed me the draft. He said he needed another month to fix the edge case. I told him the draft was too theoretical, not realistic enough for actual operations. I told him to focus on managing the Dallas warehouse inventory instead of building architecture for systems we did not need yet. 3 years ago, my younger son handed me the blueprint for a revolution in freight routing. I handed it back and told him to manage warehouse inventory, to focus on operational tasks instead of theoretical innovation. And now, that exact draft with Kellan's unfixed error still embedded in line 847 was running a company valued at $100 million. Patented under Terrence's name. Powering fraud that would destroy both my sons if Stanley discovered it. I sat back in the ergonomic chair I bought 15 years ago and closed my eyes. My hands were shaking. The office heating system clicked on warm air pushing through ceiling vents with a mechanical wheeze. Loretta had stolen Kellan's algorithm. Given it to Terrence, let him patent it as his own innovation. Built an entire company on my younger son's overlooked genius while I sat in this office signing papers and approving budgets without asking the right questions. I opened my archived email directory and searched for Kellan's name. 17,000 results spanning a decade. I filtered by date 3 years ago, March through April. One email appeared with an attachment icon. Subject line, Dad, I think I solved the multi-warehouse routing problem. Sent March 14th, marked read, attachment never opened. I clicked the timestamp details. The email had been accessed twice. Once by me, marking it read without opening the attachment. Once by an external session, March 17th, IP address, traced to the Ashford Logistics Building, floor 12, this office. 3 days after Kellan sent it. 3 days before Loretta started as Terrence's strategic advisor. She did not stumble upon the draft by chance. She extracted it from my own archived emails before I ever looked at it, accessed my account, downloaded my son's innovation, and handed it to Terrence like a wedding gift wrapped 18 months early. And I never noticed because I never opened the attachment, never read what Kellan built, never gave him the chance to explain why it mattered. The Houston port lights spread below my window like a circuit board, ships moving in slow geometric patterns toward morning. Somewhere in this building, in file cabinets and server racks and archived correspondence, was the complete map of how Loretta had systematically extracted everything valuable from my family while I sat in this chair approving invoices. I had 46 hours until the contract signing. 46 hours to trace every thread of the fraud document, every lie, and decide whether to destroy my eldest son's company to save my youngest son's stolen legacy. The phone on my desk buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Stop looking. Some things are better left buried. No signature, no caller ID, just a warning sent at 1:47 a.m. from someone who knew exactly what I was doing in this dark office. The anonymous threat did not slow me down. It confirmed I was looking in the right direction. I needed the original land contracts to verify what Loretta had done with the commercial properties, so I walked down the hall to the filing room at 2 in the morning. The fluorescent lights flickered twice before stabilizing, casting harsh white light across rows of gray steel filing cabinets. The room smelled like old paper and dust. I pulled open drawer L through M and started searching for land acquisitions, working backward through manila folders with property addresses and closing documents. Then I found something else entirely. A sealed envelope, cream-colored, addressed in handwriting I recognized immediately. Small, careful letters, more like my father's than mine. The sender line read, Kellan, Ashford, Warehouse Operations, Dallas. The postmark was dated exactly 2 years ago, corresponding to the very week of the Beaumont port dispute. This letter had been sitting in a filing cabinet for 24 months while I signed papers and approved budgets and ignored my younger son's warnings. I carried the envelope back to my office and set it down next to my laptop. Kellan's careful handwriting stared up at me from the address label. I would open it soon, but right now I needed to uncover the rest of the financial architecture Loretta and her accomplices had built. I turned back to the financial records on screen. The ghost inventory money flow ran through predictable channels. Aegis Logistics generated fraudulent invoices. Insurance companies paid claims on phantom cargo funds, moved through a Delaware clearinghouse, then vanished into a Nevada limited liability company. The Nevada LLC was registered 8 months before Terrence proposed to Loretta. She had planned the extraction before she ever wore my family's name. But the math did not balance. Aegis burned through all venture capital by third quarter last year. Ghost inventory infrastructure cost minimum $200,000 per month to keep operational. Who had been paying for it? I traced the wire transfer history backward. Aegis sent fraudulent insurance claims to the clearinghouse. The clearinghouse forwarded payments to the Nevada LLC. But the Nevada LLC also received monthly deposits from a different source. Regular transfers first of every month, exactly $200,000. I isolated the source account. The bank routing number was familiar, Southwest Regional Bank, Austin branch. I opened an account there 20 years ago for the attorney who handled all Ashford Logistics land acquisitions. The account number ended in 4471. My hand stopped on the keyboard. The cursor blinked over the account details. I knew that number. I pulled up my archived financial records and searched for 4471. 17 matches spanning 2 decades. Every land acquisition Ashford Logistics ever completed went through account 4471 as the escrow holding account. Every contract I signed, every property deed I transferred, all processed through this account. I clicked through to the Nevada LLC incorporation papers. Secretary of State filing. Registered agent Loretta Ashford. Business address private mailbox in Henderson. Then I scrolled to the ownership structure. Member 1, Loretta Ashford, managing partner. Member 2, listed as investment advisor. The investment advisor's name appeared on line 17 of the filing document. Gordon Reeves, 53 years old, corporate attorney who had handled every Ashford Logistics land acquisition for 20 years. Who I called when my father died and left me the company. Who stood beside me at the hospital when Kellan was born. Who drafted Phyllis's will when she thought the breast cancer would kill her. Who processed the incorporation papers when Terrence started Aegis. Gordon Reeves was listed as co-owner of Loretta's Nevada Shell Company. His account, 4471, the escrow account I had trusted for 2 decades, had been funding the ghost inventory fraud for the past year. I stared at the screen until the text blurred. Outside my window, Houston's port lights glowed against the pre-dawn darkness. A cargo ship moved slowly through the channel. Gordon had access to everything. Every land contract I signed, every property deed I transferred, every financial document that passed through Ashford Logistics for 20 years. When Loretta needed to steal Kellan's algorithm, Gordon could have given her my email credentials. When she needed to create the Nevada LLC, Gordon incorporated it. When Aegis ran out of venture funding, Gordon's account kept the fraud operational. The betrayal was not a family problem. It was a conspiracy built long before Terrence ever met his wife. Gordon had been positioning pieces on the board for years, and I had been signing documents without reading them because I trusted the man who put them in front of me. My phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. You have 36 hours. Walk away now or lose everything. I looked at Kellan's unopened envelope on my desk. 2 years ago, my son tried to warn me. The letter sat in a filing cabinet while Gordon and Loretta systematically extracted everything valuable from the company I built. I picked up my phone and typed a response to the anonymous number. Tell Gordon I found account 4471. Tell him I am not walking away. I hit send and watched the message status change to delivered. 3 seconds later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Gordon Reeves mobile. He had been the one sending the threats all along, and now he knew I knew. I did not answer Gordon's call. I let it ring until voicemail picked up. Then I pulled up every legal document he had filed for Ashford Logistics in the past 5 years, searching for the moment a 20-year friendship turned into calculated theft. The rain started at 4 a.m. light at first, then building to a steady drumbeat against the 12th floor windows. The office lights reflected in the wet glass, turning the Houston skyline into a watercolor blur. I started with the Nevada LLC incorporation papers and worked backward through every filing, every amendment, every registered agent change. Gordon's name appeared 17 times across 14 months of documents. not as attorney of record, as participant. He was listed as co-owner of 2 properties held by the LLC, not 1 accidental investment, 2 deliberate ownership stakes, a commercial warehouse in Henderson valued at $800,000, a storage facility outside Las Vegas worth $500,000, properties purchased with money extracted from the ghost inventory fraud he had helped architect. Gordon did not just enable Loretta's fraud, he built it. Every shell company structure, every Delaware clearinghouse routing, every Nevada filing, this was the work of someone who knew exactly how to hide money because I had paid him to move mine legally for 20 years. I pulled the incorporation timeline. The Nevada LLC was filed 14 months ago, November of last year. I checked my calendar archives. November 18th, I had lunch with Gordon at the Houston Club. We talked about Terrence's engagement to Loretta. Gordon said she seemed sharp ambitious, exactly what Terrence needed to build something serious. He ordered the salmon. I paid. 5 days later, Gordon filed the Nevada LLC incorporation papers listing himself and Loretta as co-owners. The clearinghouse routing was even more sophisticated. Gordon had structured it through 3 intermediate accounts, each one technically legal, each one designed to obscure the final destination. The money moved from Aegis insurance claims to a Delaware trust, then to a Wyoming holding company, finally to the Nevada LLC. Every step documented just enough to pass surface inspection, buried deep enough that only a forensic audit would trace the full path. This was not opportunistic betrayal. This was professional conspiracy built over years by someone who understood that I trusted paperwork more than people's signatures, more than questions. Outside the window, the Texas storm hammered against the glass like truth trying to break through a lie I had been living for half a year. The rain intensified, turning the city lights below into scattered reflections that looked like stars drowning in dark water. I opened the mortgage documents directory. 6 months ago, Phyllis had handed me papers at breakfast. She said it was routine contract renewal for the commercial properties. 3 buildings, the San Jose warehouse complex, the Houston distribution hub, the suburban office park my father bought in 1987. Standard 5-year renewal, she said. Just needs your signature. I had signed without reading. Phyllis had never lied to me before. The document loaded on screen. The header read second mortgage guarantee, commercial property portfolio, not renewal, guarantee. The date, June 14th, 6 months ago. I scrolled through the pages. Legal language dense enough to obscure the simple truth I had pledged 3 properties, every piece of physical wealth the Ashford family had accumulated over 40 years as collateral for a loan I did not know existed. The loan recipient, Aegis Logistics. The co-signers, Terrence Ashford and Loretta Ashford. The attorney who processed the paperwork, Gordon Reeves. The notary who witnessed my signature, a paralegal from Gordon's firm. I had walked into his office on a Tuesday afternoon. Gordon said it would take 5 minutes. I signed 4 pages. He made a joke about summer in Houston. I left. 6 months ago, I signed away my father's legacy as collateral for my son's fraud, and I did it in an air-conditioned office while drinking coffee and talking about the weather. The trap had been set half a year before I ever stepped into it. Every piece positioned with professional precision. Gordon filing legal documents, Phyllis delivering the papers at breakfast, Loretta building the ghost inventory system, Terrence smiling at investors and closing deals with metrics that existed only in databases. And I had trusted them all because the alternative was unthinkable. I sat back in the chair. My hands were trembling. The rain was so heavy now it sounded like static white noise filling the space where thoughts should be. My signature appeared on page 4 of the mortgage guarantee. Russell Ashford printed name. Russell Ashford signature. June 14th, 2024. The handwriting looked exactly as it always did. Steady, confident, the signature of a man who had never been lied to by his own wife. Except I had been. For how long I did not yet know. But Phyllis had handed me those papers, knowing what they were. Knowing what I was signing, knowing that every word she spoke that morning was designed to move me toward the pen. I thought about Kellan, my younger son who wrote code that would be stolen, who sent letters that would be misfiled, who tried to warn me and was ignored because I was too busy signing documents I did not bother to understand. The envelope with his handwriting still sat on my desk unopened. 2 years of warnings I had not read because I trusted the wrong people and dismissed the right ones. I looked at the clock, 5:03 a.m. The sun would rise in 90 minutes. In 31 hours, Stanley Blackwell expected me to deliver a complete shadow audit before the Sunday morning contract signing. In 31 hours, I would have to choose between protecting my family and exposing the systematic fraud they had built using my signature as the foundation. The rain poured down harder outside, blurring the city lights into abstract smears of red and white and gold. I thought of Kellan sitting at his desk in the dark writing code that would be stolen, writing letters that would never be read, waiting for a father who was too busy signing documents he did not bother to understand. I had enabled my own destruction. And now I had 90 minutes before sunrise to decide whether to finish what I started or walk away from the ruins of everything I had built. I had not slept in 36 hours when I walked into my family home for what Terrence called a celebration dinner, knowing every word they spoke would be a test to see if I had discovered their fraud. The formal dining room was staged like a performance crystal chandelier casting warm light across the mahogany table, white porcelain plates arranged with geometric precision wine glasses, positioned exactly 2 inches from each place setting. The air smelled like roasted beef and rosemary, expensive and deliberate. Terrence stood at the head of the table in a tailored gray suit, holding a glass of red wine. Loretta beside him in navy silk, her dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes tracking my entrance. Phyllis moved between kitchen and dining room, carrying dishes, with practiced efficiency, not meeting my gaze. Kellan sat 3 seats from the end, gray button-down shirt, hands folded on the table, invisible as furniture. "Dad," Terrence said, his voice pitched with artificial warmth. "Come in, we're celebrating. The final phase of the Blackwell acquisition looks incredibly promising." I took my seat across from Kellan. The chair felt like a witness stand. Phyllis brought out of the first course Caesar salad, crisp romaine, shaved parmesan. She placed mine down without looking at me. Her hand trembled slightly. She knew I had found the mortgage papers. The dinner was not a celebration. It was an interrogation disguised as family ritual. Every question Terrence asked was designed to probe what I knew, what Stanley had revealed, how much danger I represented. "So, Dad," Terrence began cutting into his salad with surgical precision, "you disappeared pretty quickly the other night after meeting Stanley. He's a heavy hitter in the industry. What did he want to talk about?" I looked at my son, 38 years old, confident smile, expensive suit, running a company built on algorithms he did not understand and freight that did not exist. "He asked about the company's history," I said. Terrence nodded, took a sip of wine. "That makes sense. He's very interested in legacy operations. Did he mention any specific concerns about the integration?" "No. Nothing about operational metrics or throughput capacity." "No." Loretta watched me from her position beside Terrence. Her eyes never left my face. She was reading me like a manifest log, looking for the tell that would prove I knew. I gave her nothing. Phyllis returned with the main course: filet mignon, roasted vegetables, garlic mashed potatoes. She moved efficiently, professionally, like someone executing a task she had practiced many times. "Terrence was just telling us about the final phase of the acquisition," Phyllis said, her voice steady. "Such exciting news for the family. All the hard work paying off." Kellan had not spoken. He sat 3 seats away, cutting his steak into precise squares, chewing slowly, existing in the same room without occupying any space. I wondered how many dinners he had sat through like this, present but unacknowledged, ignored by the brother who stole his work and the father who signed away his legacy. How many times can a family sit around a table pretending the foundation is not crumbling beneath their feet? Terrence launched into a monologue about quarterly projections and market positioning, using words that sounded impressive but meant nothing. Loretta nodded at appropriate intervals, adding strategic comments that revealed her mastery of the financial architecture. Phyllis smiled and refilled wine glasses. Kellan ate in silence. I waited until the main course was half finished. Then I looked at Terrence and asked the question I had been planning since I left the office. "Terrence," I said, my voice conversational, "in the quarterly throughput report, what is the pallet capacity of Beaumont Warehouse? I need the exact number." Terrence's fork paused midair. He blinked twice, his confident expression flickering. 2,200 pallets." The silence lasted 3 seconds. Loretta's hand tightened on her wine glass. 3,100, Dad," she said, her voice sharp. Terrence misspoke. The Beaumont facility was upgraded last quarter. 3,100 is the current capacity. She had pulled the number from the ghost inventory system. The real Beaumont warehouse, the physical building I had visited 4 months ago, could hold 1,800 pallets maximum. But Loretta's fraudulent system claimed 3,100 because the phantom freight needed somewhere to exist on paper. I looked at Terrence. My eldest son did not know the capacity of his own warehouse. He was running a company built on numbers someone else had created, signing contracts for operations he did not understand. Loretta set down her wine glass with controlled precision. When she spoke, her voice carried the cold authority of someone who believed they had already won. "Your time is long gone, Russell," she said. "These numbers are for the younger generation. You should focus on your retirement and health rather than trying to understand things beyond the comprehension of someone 64 years old. The logistics industry has evolved past the era of handshake deals and paper manifests. Perhaps it's time to acknowledge that. The room went silent. Phyllis stopped moving. Terrence stared at his plate. I looked at Kellan. My younger son was staring down at his plate, his jaw tight, his hands flat on his lap, knuckles white against the dark wood. He had heard that line more times than I had. Every family dinner, every company meeting, every conversation where innovation was discussed. Kellan sat silent while people like Loretta explained that his generation owned the future and mine was obsolete. Except the innovation she was celebrating had been stolen from Kellan's 3-year-old draft that I had dismissed without reading. I placed my knife and fork on the plate with deliberate care. The silverware clicked against porcelain. "Thank you for dinner," I said. The steak was a little overcooked. I stood up, folded my napkin, and placed it beside my plate. Phyllis reached out as if to stop me, but her hand fell back. Terrence's confident smile had frozen into something brittle. Loretta watched me leave with the satisfied expression of someone who believed they had just won. She had no idea I had been inside her system for 36 hours. She had no idea I knew about account 4471, the Nevada LLC, the ghost inventory circulating through warehouses at 3 a.m. with metronomic precision. She had no idea I had found Kellan's unopened letter or traced her co-ownership structure with Gordon Reeves. She thought she had dismissed an irrelevant old man who could not comprehend modern systems. She was wrong. I walked through the kitchen toward the side door that led to the garage. The old detached garage where Kellan and I used to sit in camping chairs when he was young talking about freight routes and distribution networks and the difference between efficient systems and human ones. Behind me I heard chair legs scraping against hardwood. Kellan was following. The garage still smelled like engine oil and sawdust, and the 2 camping chairs sat in the same corner where Kellan and I used to talk before I stopped listening. I sat in the left chair, the one I had always occupied. The fabric was faded green canvas. The overhead bulb cast yellow light through dusty air. Tools hung on pegboard walls, wrenches, screwdrivers, a level my father had owned. The side door opened. Kellan stepped inside, closed it quietly behind him. He looked at the empty chair beside mine, then sat down. The silence felt familiar, comfortable in a way the dinner table never had. Outside, distant traffic sounds a dog barking the electrical hum of the bulb. "You asked about Beaumont warehouse capacity," Kellan said finally. "You knew Terrence would get it wrong." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I needed to see if he understood the system he claims to have built." Kellan nodded slowly. He was wearing the same gray button-down from dinner sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hands were calloused from warehouse work. "What have you been building?" I asked. He looked at me, surprised by the directness. "A parallel warehouse system," he said. "Cleaner routing logic, better error handling. Based on the draft I showed you 3 years ago, but refined. I've been working on it nights and weekends." "That algorithmic error in the load optimization module," I said. "Have you fixed it yet?" Kellan's head snapped up, his eyes gray like mine, like my father's, locked onto my face. "Dad," he said slowly, "you know about that error. I know a lot of things I should have paid attention to 3 years ago." The silence stretched between us. Kellan stared at me like he was solving an equation with new variables. "How do you know about the error?" he asked. "Because I read your draft. The one I should have read 3 years ago. The one that's currently running a company valued at $100 million under your brother's name." Kellan's jaw tightened. He looked away toward the pegboard wall. "You read it," he said, not a question, a confirmation of something he had stopped hoping for. 2 nights ago. Every line. It's brilliant, Kellan. The gate logic, the exception handling the optimization architecture. It would have revolutionized how we route freight. "Would have," Kellan repeated quietly. "Have you fixed the error yet?" I asked again. He shook his head. "Not yet. I'm holding it back." "To remember," he said. "To remember that someone looked at my work and decided it wasn't worth their time." I thought of the unopened envelope in my office. Kellan had been trying to talk to me for 2 years. I just had not been in the room long enough to listen. "I'm sorry," I said. Kellan looked at me. The yellow light caught the planes of his face. "For what specifically?" he asked. The question was fair. I had 30 years of apologies to choose from. For not reading your draft when you sent it. For dismissing your architecture as theoretical. For sitting at dinner tables while Loretta told you your work didn't matter. For not noticing someone stole your genius and patented it under someone else's name. Kellan's hands gripped the armrests. His knuckles turned white. "You know," he said. "You know what they did." "Yes." "All of it." "Enough of it." We sat in silence. When Kellan was 12, we sat in these chairs and I explained why his mother had surgery. When he was 16, we talked about college and logistics systems. Then somewhere along the way, I stopped coming to the garage. I stopped listening. "What are you going to do?" Kellan asked. Before I could answer, footsteps pounded across the driveway. The side door burst open. Terrence stood in the doorway, face red eyes bloodshot. He had been drinking. His suit jacket was gone, shirt untucked, tie loosened. He looked like a man coming apart. "Dad," he said, voice thick, "we need to talk now." Kellan stood up. Terrence did not acknowledge him. "I'll go," Kellan said quietly. He walked past Terrence without making eye contact. The door closed. The garage felt smaller. "Please," Terrence said. He stumbled slightly, caught himself on the doorframe. "Please, Dad, you don't understand the pressure. The investors wanted metrics. The board wanted growth numbers. I just needed a head start. A head start to where, Terrence? To success. To proving I could build something as big as what you built. Loretta said this was the only way. Once the Blackwell acquisition clears, I was going to shut everything down and rebuild it properly. No one would have ever known." He was crying now, tears running down his face. 38 years old, standing in my garage at midnight, begging me to protect him from consequences he did not understand. "Do you know what she arranged?" I asked. Terrence looked at me, not understanding the question. His expression was blank, confused. "What do you mean?" he said. "She handled the technical side, the back-end infrastructure. I focused on the vision, the strategy. That's how partnerships work." And in that incomprehension, I saw something worse than cruelty. I saw a 38-year-old child who had been handed everything and learned nothing, who had never been forced to face real consequences, who genuinely believed that if he smiled confidently enough and spoke impressively enough, reality would bend to accommodate him. My eldest son stood in my garage, drunk and crying, asking me to protect him from the consequences of a crime he did not even understand he had committed. He was not a villain. He was a coward who had been handed everything and learned nothing. I did not know which was worse. "Go home, Terrence," I said. "Dad, please." "Go home. Sleep it off. We'll talk in the morning." He stared at me, waiting for absolution I was not going to give. Then he turned and stumbled back across the driveway toward his car. I sat alone in the garage in the camping chair where I used to teach my sons about systems and integrity and the difference between building something real and building something impressive. The next morning I would have to decide whether ignorance deserved mercy or accountability. I told Terrence I would not sign the contract and would present my findings to Stanley Blackwell at the acquisition meeting in 40 hours. He stared at me from the doorway of my home office, his drunken tears still wet on his face. The room smelled like old books and the faint citrus of furniture polish. My desk lamp cast a small circle of light across papers and the laptop screen still showing Aegis financial records. "What?" Terrence said. His voice had gone flat. "I will present a complete audit to Stanley Blackwell before the contract signing," I repeated. "The ghost inventory, the Nevada LLC, the stolen algorithm, all of it." The drunk pleading evaporated from Terrence's expression. What replaced it was colder, more calculated. He straightened, wiped his face with his sleeve, and when he spoke again, his words came out with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this conversation. "You think you're clean in this," he said. "You signed that mortgage yourself. Your lawyer, your friend of 20 years is listed with Loretta on the Nevada LLC, Gordon Reeves. If you report Stanley, you won't just destroy me. You'll destroy yourself. Your signature is on the same documents mine is." I looked at my eldest son, 38 years old, standing in my office at midnight, threatening me with evidence of my own complicity. The ignorance had been selective. He knew about the mortgage. He knew about Gordon's involvement. He had understood enough to weaponize my signature when begging failed. "Did Loretta teach you that line?" I asked, "or did you make it up yourself?" Terrence's jaw tightened. He stared at me for 5 seconds without speaking. Then he turned and walked out. He left the office door standing open behind him like an accusation. I heard his footsteps down the hall. The front door opened and closed. His car started in the driveway. The sound faded into the Houston night. The door stood open. My eldest son had walked away without closing it, as if he no longer cared what I saw. I sat in the dark for 20 minutes after he left. The desk lamp made a small island of light in the empty office. Outside, I could hear the heating system clicking on, pushing warm air through the vents. The house felt larger than it had in 30 years. Then I turned back to the laptop and opened the Aegis administrative portal. The system logged me in with root-level access. Stanley's credentials gave me permissions even Terrence did not have the ability to post system-wide notices, trigger automated workflows, monitor all administrative activity. I opened the notification composer and began drafting the bait. Subject line urgent. Surprise physical inventory audit. All warehouses 8 a.m. tomorrow. Body per request of Blackwell Freight Systems Supervisory Board. A complete physical inventory audit will be conducted at Dallas, San Antonio, and Beaumont warehouse facilities, beginning 8 a.m. on December 4th. All facility managers report to loading docks with complete manifest logs. Compliance flagged for executive review. Discrepancies subject to immediate investigation. I set the distribution list to include all Aegis executives, all warehouse supervisors, and most importantly, Loretta's personal admin account. Then I set the delivery time 1 a.m. Exactly. The notice was designed to trigger Loretta's perfectionism. She had spent 14 months building a ghost inventory system with flawless metrics. Every number balanced, every manifest matched. The fraud looked perfect because she had made it perfect. But perfection requires constant maintenance. A surprise physical audit would expose the ghost freight immediately pallets reported in the system, but absent from warehouses, serial numbers that did not match physical tags, throughput claims contradicted by loading dock cameras. Loretta would not let that exposure survive overnight. She would log and review the audit scope and attempt to scrub any flags before morning, and when she did, I would be watching. I opened a terminal window and configured a packet monitoring script. Every connection to the Aegis admin server would be logged, IP address, account credentials, timestamp, actions taken. Any administrative activity after 1 a.m. would leave an irrevocable digital fingerprint. The trap was simple. Loretta's weakness was not greed or ambition, it was perfectionism. The crooked perfection of a cheat who could not tolerate even the smallest visible flaw. I was not building a fortress against my family. I was building a mirror so precise they would have no choice but to see themselves clearly. I reviewed the notice one final time. The language was official enough to be credible, urgent enough to trigger immediate action. Stanley's name lent authority. The 8 a.m. timeline created pressure. I clicked schedule and watched the confirmation appear. Notice queued for delivery at 1 o'clock December 4th, 2024. The packet monitor activated with a soft chime. Green text scrolled across the terminal window. Monitoring active. Logging all admin server connections. Timestamp 004723. I leaned back in my desk chair. The leather creaked. Outside my window, suburban Houston slept houses. Dark streets empty, only the occasional car passing with headlights cutting through the December night. In 13 minutes, Loretta would receive an email that threatened the perfect facade she had spent 14 months constructing. A notice claiming Stanley Blackwell's supervisory board, which did not exist, had requested an immediate audit. She would know something was wrong. She was too smart not to recognize the trap. But she would also know that leaving the notice unaddressed was worse than walking into it. If warehouse supervisors showed up at 8 a.m. expecting an audit and found nothing, they would ask questions. If Gordon Reeves saw the notice, he might panic and call her. If Terrence saw it and realized the audit was real, he might crack completely. Loretta would have to log in. She would have to verify the notice was fake, delete it from the system, scrub it from distribution lists. She would have to leave her fingerprints on the cover-up. And I would be watching every keystroke she made to erase it. The clock on my desk showed 12:47 a.m. The terminal window displayed monitoring active. No connections detected. At 1:12 a.m., the terminal window on my laptop exploded with activity, green text cascading down the screen as Loretta's device connected to the company VPN from her IP address in Hill Country. She had taken the bait in exactly 12 minutes. The packet sniffer logged everything. Connection initiated from 192.168.1.47. MAC address BC47602F8A1D. Session authentication using Terrence's master admin credentials. Every keystroke, every database query, every file access stamped with cryptographic hashes that would hold up in federal court. I watched the green text scroll. Loretta navigated directly to the audit notification email. Deleted it at 1:18 a.m. Then instead of logging out, she opened the financial archive directory. She was going deeper. The logs showed her accessing quarterly reports from the past 18 months. She opened Q2 2024, Q3 2024, Q4 2024. Then the SQL queries started appearing. Update financial _ reports, set modified _ date equals March 15th, 2024. Where report _ ID in Q2 _ 2024, Q3 _ 2024, Q4 _ 2024. She's modifying timestamps, I whispered to myself. She's trying to make it look like the deal approvals happened 6 months earlier than they did. The packet sniffer captured everything. File system metadata showing original creation dates. Database logs showing the timestamp alterations. SHA 256 cryptographic hashes proving the files had been manipulated. 53 individual file modifications over 47 minutes. Loretta was not covering her tracks. She was actively tampering with evidence. She had just converted circumstantial fraud into federal crimes committed in real time while I documented every action. At 2:03 a.m., her session terminated. The terminal window showed connection closed, 53 files modified, complete forensic log saved. I leaned back in my desk chair. The coffee beside my laptop had gone cold, leaving ring stains on the printouts of mortgage documents. Outside, distant thunder rolled across hill country. My daughter had walked into the trap, and she had done exactly what her perfectionism demanded. She had tried to make the system flawless. She had no idea I was watching. Russell. I looked up. Phyllis stood in the study doorway wearing her blue robe, hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes were red. "I couldn't sleep," she said. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat down slowly, like someone testing the strength of thin ice. "The mortgage," I said. "The one on the hill country property. I analyzed your signature. The pressure points don't match your natural writing style. You signed it under duress." Phyllis's hands folded in her lap. Her wedding ring caught the lamplight. 25 years, Russell," she said quietly. "I've been signing papers for 25 years because of 3 weeks I can't take back." The thunder moved closer. I waited. "June 2000, Phyllis said. Galveston Logistics Conference. You were in Memphis for expansion meetings. I was alone at the hotel bar at sunset. Marcus Webb, logistics consultant from Austin 43 Kind Eyes, asked if the seat next to me was taken. 3 weeks of feeling seen after years of loneliness. Then Stanley Blackwell called on July 8th. Her voice cracked. She twisted the wedding ring. He had photographs from the flagship hotel, room 412, June 16th, 19th, and 22nd. He said he needed me to understand how valuable his discretion could be to our family. I stared at my wife of 37 years. "Stanley Blackwell blackmailed you." He said if I ever told you, he'd make sure everyone knew, our clients, our children, the entire Houston business community. I thought I was protecting you, protecting us. "You could have told me," I said. "We could have faced it together." "I was 42 years old, terrified and ashamed," Phyllis said. Tears ran down her face. "He promised the blackmail would end after Terrence took over the company. I thought if I just signed what he needed, it would eventually stop." I reached across the desk. My hand was shaking. She took it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. After she left, I sat alone in the study. The thunder had passed, leaving only silence. Then I noticed the manila envelope in Kellan's lockbox, the one I had not yet opened. The postmark, March 15th, 2022. Inside were 8 handwritten pages in Kellan's careful script. The letter began, "Dad, if you're reading this, I've either been forced out completely or worse, and you finally started looking for answers. I'm writing this in March 2023 because I've discovered something that will destroy our family, and I don't know who else to tell." My hands trembled holding the pages. Blue ink bled slightly where Kellan had pressed hard for emphasis. "Stanley Blackwell has been systematically manipulating Loretta since 2021. I've documented his pattern. Identify family vulnerabilities, isolate the target, provide guidance while encouraging unethical decisions. He'll make her feel intellectually superior to you. He'll frame every ethical compromise as business sophistication. He'll use Terrence's addiction as proof that your generation failed. He'll convince her that destroying you is the same as building herself." Every prediction Kellan made had come true. Every tactic Stanley used Kellan had identified 2 years before I saw it happening. The letter ended. "I'm going to confront Stanley next week. If something happens to me, you'll know why. I'm sorry I couldn't protect Loretta from him. I'm sorry I couldn't protect us." I read the 8 pages twice. Kellan had tried to warn me 2 years ago. He had documented Stanley's manipulation. He had seen the entire conspiracy forming. And I had never opened the envelope. It had sat in the lockbox while Stanley spent 2 more years weaponizing my family against each other. I sat at my desk at 3 a.m. holding Kellan's letter in one hand and looking at the forensic logs on my laptop screen. I had evidence of Loretta's crimes, evidence of Stanley's decades-long blackmail, evidence of Gordon's conspiracy, evidence of Terrence's cowardice. I could go to the FBI in 6 hours with enough documentation to destroy everyone. Or I could use what I knew to dismantle Stanley's empire. While trying to save the family legacy from the daughter-in-law Kellan had risked everything trying to expose. I had 6 hours before the office opened to decide which kind of father I was going to be. At 4:30 a.m., I dialed the number for Agent Dylan Morris at the FBI's Economic Crimes Unit, a contact from 30 years of logistics industry security conferences, and made the decision that would either save my daughter or send her to federal prison. The phone rang 3 times. Morris answered voice alert despite the hour. "Dylan Morris." "Agent Morris, this is Russell Ashford. Ashford Logistics, Houston. We met at the Transsecure Conference in 2019. I need to report a federal crime involving my family." A pause. The sound of a chair creaking, papers shuffling. Mr. Ashford, I remember, give me a moment to open a secure line. 30 seconds of silence. Then, go ahead. This conversation is recorded and may be used as evidence. I spent 20 minutes walking him through the evidence. Ghost inventory scheme circulating through 3 warehouses. Nevada LLC extracting capital. Wire transfers totaling $47 million over 5 years. Loretta's digital fingerprint from hours ago showing her tampering with file timestamps. Kellan's letter from March 2023, predicting Stanley Blackwell's manipulation tactics. Morris asked precise questions, account numbers, IP addresses, dates, serial numbers. I had documentation for everything. Mr. Ashford, Morris said when I finished, what you're describing is wire fraud, computer fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. If the physical inventory discrepancies match your documentation, we can move within 48 hours. My daughter committed these crimes, I said. I need to know, is there any scenario where cooperation reduces her exposure? Another pause. I could hear typing in the background. That depends entirely on whether she's the architect or a manipulated participant, Morris said. Your son's letter suggesting external influence by Stanley Blackwell could matter, but she'd need to cooperate fully and testify against co-conspirators. Stanley Blackwell, I said, you know that name. I can't discuss active investigations, Morris said carefully, but I can tell you that if your evidence connects to certain ongoing inquiries into Gulf Coast Logistics bid rigging, it would be extremely valuable to multiple federal cases. Stanley Blackwell has been a person of interest for 18 months. The entry twist hit me with cold clarity. The FBI had already been watching Stanley. My daughter's fraud was not an isolated crime. It was part of a larger pattern they had been documenting for over a year. What do you need from me? I asked. Physical corroboration, Morris said. Your digital evidence is strong, but defense attorneys will argue it was fabricated. I need you to personally verify the inventory discrepancies. Go to Warehouse 7, Loading Dock B. Check the serial numbers on the freight logs against what's physically present. Take photographs. Document everything. Do it before the 7 a.m. shift change so you're not interfering with business operations. I'll go now. Send me everything you have in encrypted format. Use the secure portal link I'm texting you. And Mr. Ashford, this took courage. Not many fathers would turn in their own children. I hung up and sat in the dark office for 3 minutes. Then I began compiling the dossier. 64 pages. Ghost inventory logs showing the phantom freight circulating at perfect 47-minute intervals. Wire transfer records tracing money from Aegis through Delaware, Clearinghouse to Greystone Freight Holdings, LLC. Code comparison showing Kellan's algorithm stolen line by line. Nevada incorporation papers listing Loretta and Gordon Reeves as co-owners. My handwritten notes from Phyllis's confession about Stanley's 25-year blackmail. The complete packet monitoring logs from Loretta's 1:12 a.m. intrusion. Kellan's 8-page letter predicting everything that came true. The dossier contained everything that would dismantle the company I spent 40 years building, potentially send my daughter to federal prison, expose my wife's 25-year blackmail nightmare to courtroom scrutiny, and prove that Kellan had tried to warn me about threats I was too blind to see. I encrypted the file with military-grade AES 256 and uploaded it to the FBI portal. Confirmation appeared. File received. Case number assigned HC202488847F. Morris called back at 6:15 a.m. We've been building a parallel case on Blackwell for 18 months, he said. Your evidence fills the gaps we needed. Judge Harmon has authorized emergency warrants based on ongoing investigation. We can move this morning. Then I created a second copy. Opened my email. Addressed it to Kellan's personal account, the one he still checked daily even though we had not spoken meaningfully in years. Subject line, open this only when I call you. Body Kellan, if you're reading this without my call, something has happened to me. The attached dossier documents, everything Stanley's manipulation, Loretta's fraud, Gordon's conspiracy, the blackmail against your mother. It's set to auto-forward to Wall Street Journal, Houston Chronicle, and 3 logistics industry publications if I don't send weekly disarm codes. Stanley Blackwell silenced you once by forcing you out of the company. He won't silence me. I'm sorry I didn't listen when you tried to warn me. I'm listening now. Dad. I hit send and watched the message disappear into the digital void, a dead man's switch, insurance against retaliation. Through the east windows, the Houston ship channel began glowing orange as dawn broke. Cargo ships lined up in the navigation channel like evidence in a chain of custody, each one waiting its turn to be documented, processed, and either cleared for passage or flagged for inspection. I had become the inspector flagging my own family for violations that could not be ignored. The clock on my desk showed 6:28 a.m. I had 17 minutes before the Warehouse 7 shift change. Agent Morris had been clear physical evidence would expedite the warrant from days to hours. Without it, defense attorneys would claim my digital documentation was fabricated by a bitter father trying to frame his successful daughter. I needed the freight logs, the serial numbers, the photographs showing empty loading docks where ghost inventory supposedly existed. I locked the office at 6:45 a.m. and drove toward the Port District as Houston's morning shift began arriving. Traffic was light delivery trucks heading to warehouses, port workers changing shifts, the city waking up to another December day. Loading Dock B would have the freight logs, physical records that either matched the ghost inventory or exposed the discrepancies that proved $47 million in fraud. And if Loretta or Stanley had morning surveillance on the warehouse, if they were watching for signs I had discovered the system, I had approximately 12 minutes before they knew I was hunting the final piece of evidence that would make the federal case airtight. I turned onto Port Boulevard. Warehouse 7 appeared ahead, concrete and steel against the orange dawn sky. The loading dock was empty. No trucks, no workers, just the security light over Dock B and the industrial silence of a facility between shifts. I had 12 minutes to document 40 years of lies. Loretta was waiting in the headquarters lobby at 7:15 a.m. when I walked in from Warehouse 7, and the expression on her face told me she had been planning this confrontation since she discovered someone had accessed the financial archives at 1:12 a.m. last night. She stood near the glass elevator bank, arms crossed, wearing a charcoal business suit. Her dark hair was pulled back with the same precision she applied to everything. The lobby was empty, no security guard, no early arrivals, just the two of us and the industrial hum of the building's ventilation system. "Good morning, Dad," she said. The word dad came out like an insult. I did not respond. I walked toward the elevators. She stepped into my path. "We need to talk," she said. "Move, Loretta. You're a 64-year-old man who spent 25 years married to a woman signing documents behind your back and never noticed," she said. Her voice was calm, measured, surgical. "You worshipped Kellan for his integrity while he was lying to you for 5 years. The Ashford honesty you're so proud of, it's a joke. You're the punchline." I stood perfectly still. She continued. "You're drowning in legal liability, one step from bankruptcy. Without my brain, Ashford would be foreclosed property right now. You should be thanking me on your knees, old man." 6 minutes. She spoke for 6 minutes without stopping. Every word carefully chosen. Every accusation precisely aimed at the places she knew would hurt most. The wife I didn't understand, the son whose secrets I missed, the company I was supposedly too senile to lead, the family name I couldn't protect, the federal prison cell she believed I deserved. She itemized every failure of my life in 6 minutes, the wife I didn't understand, the son whose secrets I missed, the company I was supposedly too senile to lead, the family name I couldn't protect, and the federal prison cell she believed I deserved. "If you interfere with the Blackwell acquisition," she finished, "I will personally ensure you face federal charges as a co-conspirator. Your signature is on those mortgage documents. Your lawyer is listed on the Nevada LLC. You're not clean, Russell. You're just too stupid to see it." I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, held it up so she could see the screen. Recording 0647. Still running. "Thank you, Loretta," I said quietly. That was exactly what Agent Morris needed to hear. Every word recorded, time-stamped, and admissible. Her expression did not change immediately. Then something flickered behind her eyes, calculation turning to recognition, turning to cold fury. "You recorded me," she said. 6 minutes and 47 seconds of confession. Prior knowledge of crimes, intent to manipulate legal proceedings, threats against a federal witness. Agent Morris will appreciate your clarity. I stopped the recording, saved the file, sent it to my encrypted backup. Loretta stared at me. Her hands had formed fists at her sides. "Before I tell you what happened in that glass elevator, are you still with me?" Comment. A, if you think I was right to record her, or B, if you think I crossed a line, and add one short reason. A quick note, what follows includes some fictionalized details to deepen the emotional impact. The lesson is what matters. I walked past her to the elevator, pressed the button. The doors opened immediately. She did not follow me. She stood in the lobby perfectly still, watching the elevator doors close between us. I pulled out my phone and called Kellan. He answered on the first ring. "I got your email. Did you open the encrypted file?" "Yes." "The payload routing module from your original system," I said. "The algorithmic error that cascades when you input negative freight weight. Do you remember it?" Silence for 3 seconds, then Kellan's voice sharpened with something I had not heard in years. Focus mixed with understanding, mixed with controlled anger. "That wasn't an error, Dad," he said. I built it deliberately as a system override in case we ever needed emergency shutdown. It triggers cascade failure across all dependent modules if you input a negative weight value. The glass elevator rose through the headquarters atrium like a bullet chambering in a weapon, smooth, mechanical, inevitable. While Kellan explained how the kill switch worked, negative weight input triggers, cascade failure across all dependent modules, freezing every transaction Loretta touched in the past 18 months. Can you deploy it remotely? I asked. From the warehouse terminal, yes, but it needs to be timed precisely. If I activate too early, she'll have time to counteract. Too late, and she'll have already executed whatever she's planning. There's a board meeting at 8:45 a.m., I said. Loretta plans to formalize the Blackwell acquisition and transfer operational control. How many minutes do you need to freeze her system access before the meeting starts? 60 minutes for clean deployment, Kellan said. I need to isolate the authentication servers first, then cascade the override through dependent systems. I looked at my watch, 7:25 a.m. I need it done in 55 minutes, I said. Can you do that? Another pause. I could hear keyboard typing in the background. Yes, Kellan said, but once I activate, there's no undo. Every transaction she's touched, every file she's modified, every access point she's used, everything freezes permanently. The forensic trail becomes locked evidence. That's exactly what I need, I said. Activating now, Kellan said. System freeze will complete at 8:20 a.m., 25 minutes before her board meeting. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor. The hallway was empty. Morning light came through the windows overlooking Houston. Kellan, I said. Yeah. Thank you for building that override, even when I didn't listen to why you built it. He did not respond immediately. Then, I built it because I knew someday someone would need to stop something that shouldn't exist. I didn't know it would be us stopping her. I hung up and stood in the hallway. Kellan had 55 minutes to deploy the system freeze before Loretta's board meeting where she planned to formalize her takeover. I thought about the Hill Country property. 200 acres paid in full, the only asset in our family that wasn't contaminated by blackmail, fraud, or betrayal. My grandfather bought that land in 1961 with money he earned driving freight trucks. My father held onto it through 3 recessions. I had transferred it to Kellan. If everything else burned, at least that land would still be clean. I walked toward the conference room. In 55 minutes, Loretta would try to access her systems and find nothing but frozen databases and locked authentication servers. She would realize too late that the algorithm she stole had contained a weapon she never knew existed. And I would be sitting across from her when it happened. When my phone rang at 7:45 a.m. and Gordon Reeves' name appeared on the screen, I knew the nightmare had another layer. Russell. His voice carried none of its usual professional polish. I'm violating attorney-client privilege to tell you this, so listen carefully. Loretta has an automated file set to submit to the Texas State Bar, the SEC, and 3 major news outlets at exactly 9 o'clock this morning, unless she manually cancels it. I pulled over on the access road, hazard lights flashing. What kind of file? Fabricated evidence designed to destroy your credibility before you can present yours. He paused. Medical records showing a dementia diagnosis. Emails you supposedly sent containing paranoid accusations against staff members. A psychiatric evaluation commissioned by your concerned family documenting delusional episodes and financial incompetence. It's brilliantly constructed, Russell. Every document has just enough truth woven through it to seem plausible. The traffic on I-10 blurred past my window. You helped her build this. I helped structure her legal strategy, yes, but I didn't sign up to watch her completely annihilate a man who built something real. His voice hardened. The blackmail file paints you as mentally unfit to run your own company. By 9:30, every board member will have received copies. By 10, it'll be on Bloomberg. Why are you telling me? Because Loretta crossed a line I won't cross. He exhaled slowly. And because you asked me a direct question yesterday about the Nevada LLC timeline. The answer is yes, I can testify truthfully about when those entities were actually formed. October 2022, not 2019, as the backdated documents claim. I was there. I gripped the steering wheel. Will you get me a subpoena and I'll honor it? But Russell, you've got 73 minutes before that file goes live. Whatever evidence you have, you need it in front of the board before Loretta destroys your credibility to present it. The call ended at 7:58 a.m. I had 2 more stops before the meeting. Warehouse 7 sat at the edge of our Bayport complex, a low concrete building where container freight moved through customs clearance. I pulled into the empty lot at 8:02 a.m. A single truck idled near the loading dock, Conrad Redmond's 15-year-old F-150 held together by rust and determination. He stepped out when I parked. 51 years old, 23 years in logistics with the weathered face of a man who'd spent 2 decades in Houston's industrial corridor. Terrence had fired him 3 months ago for questioning cost discrepancies. Mr. Ashford. He carried a cardboard box, the kind that once held copy paper. I figured you'd come looking eventually. You said you kept records. Handwritten logs, 2 years' worth. He set the box on my hood. When the digital system started showing numbers that didn't match what I was physically counting, I started keeping my own books. Every container, every pallet, every discrepancy, dated and signed. I opened the box. 12 spiral-bound notebooks, their covers stained with warehouse grime. The top one fell open to a random page, October 14th, 2022. Container MSCU-4479518 system shows 847 units electronics. Physical count 847 units. Discrepancy 0. But invoice to Walmart distribution shows 1,120 units at $47 per. Ghost inventory value $12,831. How many times had I watched evidence dissolve under scrutiny? How many digital records could Loretta's lawyers argue were compromised, manipulated, misinterpreted? But this was the cramped handwriting of a man who'd stood in a warehouse at 2 a.m. with a clipboard counting pallets because the numbers didn't add up. Why keep these? I asked. Because I've got a daughter starting college next year and I knew Terrence fired me to shut me up. Conrad's jaw tightened. I'm not letting him steal my 23 years of reputation without a fight. Those logs prove the fraud happened on his watch with his knowledge. The dates match perfectly with when he took over operational oversight. I flipped through those notebooks, page after page of meticulous documentation, container numbers, physical counts, system counts, invoice, amounts, calculated discrepancies. Every entry dated and signed. 2 years of evidence that couldn't be deleted, couldn't be hacked, couldn't be explained away as system errors. You kept duplicates, photographed every page and stored them in 3 separate locations. He handed me a flash drive. Digital backups here. But Mr. Ashford, those handwritten logs are going to carry more weight in court than any spreadsheet. That's the handwriting of someone with nothing to lose and no reason to lie. At 8:15 a.m. I loaded the box into my passenger seat. The notebooks smelled like diesel fuel and cardboard like every warehouse I'd ever worked in. 40 years ago, I'd done Conrad's job counting freight-checking manifests, building the foundation that became Ashford Logistics. Now that foundation was my salvation. I pulled out my phone. 3 countdown timers, 3 converging crisis points, 8:17 a.m. Kellan's system freeze in 28 minutes. Loretta's blackmail file in 43 minutes. Board meeting in 28 minutes. Conrad knocked on my window. Mr. Ashford, they're going to come after my credibility. Terrence will say I'm a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. Let him. I met his eyes. Because these logs don't just document fraud, they document when the fraud started, who authorized the system changes, and who fired the one person paying attention. Your axe is ground on 2 years of truth. I drove toward downtown with a box of handwritten notebooks on my passenger seat, the kind of evidence that couldn't be explained away with technical excuses. Loretta had digital sophistication and legal precision, but I had the cramped handwriting of a warehouse supervisor who'd counted pallets at 2 a.m. because the numbers didn't add up. Sometimes the simplest proof is the hardest to destroy. Stanley Blackwell was waiting in the 47th floor hallway outside the boardroom at 8:50 a.m., positioned between me and the door like a final checkpoint, and the expression on his face told me he knew exactly what I was carrying in Conrad Redmond's logbooks. I'd made it through traffic, through security, through the elevator ride with the cardboard box on my hip. Now the last obstacle stood 6 feet from the boardroom entrance, hands clasped behind his back in the stance of a man delivering a prepared statement. Russell. His voice carried the formal weight of a judge reading a verdict. If you present what I think you're about to present, you won't just lose this deal, you'll lose the company, most of your assets, and possibly your freedom. I want to be clear. I'm offering you the chance to walk away right now. I shifted the box to my other hip. You know what's in here. I've known since Gordon Reeves called me at 7:15 this morning. Stanley's expression didn't change. He violated attorney-client privilege to warn me that you'd obtained physical documentation of systematic fraud. He wanted me to understand that what you're about to do isn't malice or senility, it's evidence. I appreciate the courtesy, even if it destroys 2 years of merger negotiations. So Gordon had made one more call before warning me about Loretta's blackmail file. One more move in a chess game where everyone was trying to control the endgame. Why offer me an exit? I asked. Stanley studied my face. Because I've spent 6 months investigating your family's operational structure, and I know you built something real before it was corrupted. Walking into that boardroom will trigger countersuit for defamation, corporate sabotage, potentially breach of fiduciary duty. Loretta has already positioned legal response to frame your evidence gathering as illegal surveillance. You'll face years of litigation even if you prove every accusation, and Terrence will ensure you lose operational control regardless of outcome. I know what it costs. I'm doing it anyway. Why? Stanley's tone shifted, not challenging, genuinely asking. After 64 years of building something, why burn it down in the final hour? The answer crystallized with absolute clarity. Because I have a son who has never seen his father do the right thing, and if I don't do it now, he never will. Stanley was silent for 7 seconds. Then something that might have been respect crossed his face, the acknowledgement of one builder recognizing another's final foundation pour. He nodded once and walked into the boardroom ahead of me. I followed him through the door at 9 a.m. sharp. The boardroom was designed for victory floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Houston Ship Channel, where cargo ships moved like chess pieces across brown water. Mahogany table polished to courtroom shine, 16 leather chairs positioned like jury seats, and champagne bucket sweating condensation onto celebration napkins that would never be used. This was the space where billion-dollar logistics empires changed hands, where 40 years of work was supposed to conclude with handshakes and wire transfers. Terrence sat center table in a bespoke navy suit, his confidence fully restored from the broken state I'd witnessed 2 days ago at the wedding reception. Whatever chemical equilibrium he'd found, whatever story Loretta had sold him about controlling the narrative, he looked like a man who'd already won. His iPad displayed the prepared merger documentation tabs marked for signature. Loretta sat beside him in a charcoal business suit, one hand resting casually on her phone. Her expression radiated confidence. She nodded slightly as I entered, the acknowledgement of a negotiator who'd successfully closed a deal. Phyllis sat behind my designated chair at the far end, pale and exhausted. 25 years of blackmail secrecy was about to end one way or another. She met my eyes with something between terror and relief. Stanley's legal counsel occupied the far end. Margot Sheffield, 56, senior legal counsel with 30 years of merger certification experience, her reading glasses already positioned on the documentation before her. And David Russo, 43, corporate attorney representing Blackwell's interests, his laptop open to transaction protocols. Both were here to witness the largest merger in Blackwell Freight Systems history. Stanley placed his phone face down on the table, the signal that formal proceedings had begun. Before we proceed with the signing ceremony, I'd like Mr. Ashford to review one operational matter for the record. Russell, you had concerns about inventory reconciliation. Terrence smiled, gesturing to his prepared documentation. Dad, we've already prepared full reports. Everything reconciles perfectly. No need to delay the signing with operational minutiae. I set Conrad Redmond's box on the table. Actually, Terrence, it doesn't reconcile, not even close. Stanley looked directly at me. No surprise, no intervention. He'd offered the exit in the hallway. I'd refused. Now he was giving me the floor, fully aware that what came next would destroy his merger, but preserve something he'd decided mattered more. I opened my encrypted tablet and pulled up the scanned pages of Conrad's logbooks. 12 notebooks, 2 years of handwritten documentation photographed and backed up in 3 locations. The kind of evidence that couldn't be deleted, couldn't be explained away as corrupted data, couldn't be dismissed as technical error. In approximately 30 seconds, I would begin presenting evidence that would send my daughter-in-law to federal prison, destroy the company I spent 40 years building, expose my wife's 25-year blackmail nightmare to legal scrutiny, validate my younger son's warnings that I ignored, and prove to Terrence that integrity costs everything, which was either the lesson that would save him or the trauma that would finish destroying him. I opened the first page of Conrad Redmond's logbooks on my tablet screen and began. On October 14, 2022, Warehouse 7 Loading Dock B received manifest number 47821 reporting 240 pallets. The actual count was 186. By the third discrepancy from Conrad Redmond's logbooks, manifest 48104 showing 312 reported pallets versus 198 actual count. Terrence had stopped smiling and Loretta's hand had moved from her phone to the table edge, her knuckles whitening with controlled pressure. I advanced the tablet display to the projection screen Stanley's team had positioned on the far wall. Conrad Redmond documented 847 discrepancies over 23 months. Every single one follows the same pattern. System reports higher inventory than physical count. The difference isn't random shrinkage or theft, it's systematic ghost inventory designed to inflate operational value. Margot Sheffield leaned forward, her reading glasses reflecting the projection. How systematic? I overlaid the Aegis executive summary beside Conrad's handwritten logs. The pattern emerged in stark visual clarity. Phantom freight movements occurring between 200 and 400 a.m., spaced at 47-minute intervals, each transaction showing identical throughput values of 186 pallets. February 2023, March 2023, April 2023, month after month, the same mathematical precision. Real freight doesn't move like a metronome, I said. Drivers take breaks, traffic delays, shipments, loading times vary. But these movements every 47 minutes, exactly 186 pallets, always between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock a.m., are mathematically perfect. That's not logistics. That's code. Terrence's voice carried forced confidence. Those are stress testing protocols. We run capacity simulations to optimize routing algorithms. Any modern logistics system includes. Then explain why every truck in our fleet was parked at the depot with engines cold during these ghost movements. I pulled up the GPS overlay, blue dots showing actual vehicle positions, red lines showing system-reported movements. Not a single match. Explain why Conrad Redmond's physical counts never matched the system by exactly the ghost quantity. The projection screen showed 23 months of ghost movements in red overlay against real GPS positions in blue. February 2023, 847 phantom pallets while trucks idled. April 2023, 1,124 phantom pallets during maintenance weekend. September 2023, 2,316 phantom pallets across 3 nights, $4.7 million in fictional freight that existed only in Loretta's algorithm. Terrence had no answer. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The confident expression that had carried him through 48 hours of merger preparation fractured like safety glass under pressure, still intact, but visibly shattered. Stanley Blackwell's voice cut through the silence. The pattern is algorithmic. Someone coded this into your operational software from inception. Not someone. I advanced to the financial evidence. Loretta Ashford, who designed Aegis as a system integration specialist before becoming our chief operations officer, who had administrator access to every subroutine, every validation protocol, every audit override, who structured the ghost inventory to flow through a specific extraction vehicle. The next slide showed bank records, $40 million over 5 years, moving through a Delaware clearinghouse in increments designed to stay below federal reporting thresholds, ultimately depositing into a Nevada LLC named Greystone Freight Holdings. David Russo straightened in his chair. Nevada corporate veil, single-member LLC, no public ownership disclosure required, except the incorporation documents are public record. I displayed the filing, State of Nevada Secretary of State, Certificate of Organization, Greystone Freight Holdings, LLC, Registered Agent Loretta Ashford, filed March 15, 2019. The date hung in the boardroom like a verdict. Terrence's voice came out hollow. We weren't married until November. November 23, 2019, I confirmed. You proposed in April. You introduced Loretta to our systems in June when she started consulting on the Aegis migration. But she registered the extraction vehicle in March, 8 months before the wedding, before you proposed, before she had any official connection to Ashford Logistics. I watched Terrence's face as he read the incorporation date and calculated backward to their engagement announcement party on April 2, 2019, realizing she had already registered the extraction vehicle before he proposed, before he introduced her to the company systems, before he believed they were building something together. His addiction had made him vulnerable. His authority had made him useful. But the plan had existed before he ever imagined himself part of it. Loretta sat perfectly still, her expression controlled and unreadable. She'd shifted from confident negotiator to tactical defendant in the span of 8 minutes, and her training had kicked in the same cold calculation that had structured 5 years of systematic fraud, now focused on limiting legal exposure. Loretta, Terrence turned to his wife, his voice carrying the weight of a man watching his marriage dissolve into evidence. You created the company 8 months before our wedding. She met his gaze with the flat affect of someone who'd already moved 3 steps ahead in a chess game. I'm not answering questions without my attorney present. Your attorney helped you structure this. My voice stayed level, factual. Gordon Reeves provided the legal architecture for the Nevada LLC, the Delaware clearinghouse, and the extraction timeline. He called me this morning to warn me about your automated blackmail file and to tell me he'd testify truthfully about the timeline. March 2019, Loretta. You built the theft mechanism before you built the marriage. Terrence's hands were shaking. Not the tremor of chemical withdrawal, the full-body shock of a man realizing he'd been the access point, not the partner. That every conversation about building their future together had been covered for extracting his family's past. that the woman he'd married had calculated the entire relationship as an operational strategy. Phyllis sat motionless behind me, watching her son comprehend what she'd understood for 25 years. Some people build relationships as leverage, not love. Stanley's legal team was taking notes with the methodical precision of attorneys documenting a merger's spectacular collapse. 48 hours ago, they'd been preparing celebration documents. Now they were witnessing the systematic destruction of due diligence assumptions. Loretta had invoked her right to attorney counsel, creating tactical silence. But I wasn't finished. The Ghost Inventory and Nevada LLC proved fraud and extraction. They didn't prove who taught her how to weaponize a family, who provided the templates for manipulation, or who had been running this exact scheme across Houston logistics companies for 30 years. I advanced to the next slide, showing Stanley Blackwell's financial history. The projection screen split into two columns at 9:18 a.m., Aegis routing algorithm on the left, Kellan's 3-year-old draft code on the right, and even Loretta could see they were identical before I said a word. I'd postponed Stanley's financial history for something more immediate: intellectual property theft. The code comparison displayed gate logic routines, error handling protocols, payload optimization modules, lines 47 through 183 identical, lines 244 through 307 identical. Variable names, syntax structure, comment blocks, all copied without modification. The Aegis proprietary routing algorithm, I said, which Loretta claimed to have developed as innovative logistics software, was stolen line by line from work my younger son drafted 3 years ago when he was studying computer science at Rice University. Terrence stared at the screen, then at his wife. You told me you built this from scratch. You said it was your breakthrough architecture. Loretta's expression remained controlled, but her jaw tightened. She was calculating exit strategies, weighing which lies could still hold. I zoomed in on line 412. This one's particularly interesting: a payload weight validation bypass that creates cascade failure when negative values are input. It's a rookie error, the kind a college student makes when learning exception handling. Most developers would catch it during testing. But Loretta copied the code without understanding what she was stealing. The error is still there, embedded in every Aegis installation we've deployed. Margot Sheffield was taking notes with the precision of an attorney documenting grounds for criminal charges. When was the original code created? March 2021, submitted as part of Kellan's coursework with cryptographic timestamp verification through Rice's academic integrity system. I pulled up the metadata. The same code appeared in Aegis version 1.0 in October 2022, 18 months later, with Loretta listed as sole architect. The original draft with full timestamp verification proving creation date and authorship was submitted to federal authorities at 4:47 a.m. this morning. The screen showed code comparison line by line. Kellan's draft: if freight_manifest.exception equals null, log_error, _cascade, manifest.id timestamp, yo, versus Aegis code. If freight_manifest.exception equals null, log_error, _cascade, manifest.id timestamp. Identical variable names, identical syntax, identical comments, even identical typo in the comment block, calling it optimization instead of optimization. Federal intellectual property theft, David Russo said quietly. That's separate from the financial fraud. Different statute, different jurisdiction. I gestured toward the back of the boardroom where Kellan Ashford had been sitting silently throughout the entire presentation. The author would like to confirm. Kellan stood, 36 years old, wearing the same work jacket he'd worn in the warehouse for 2 years, with the posture of someone who'd been watching and waiting for exactly this moment. He met Loretta's eyes directly. I've been here since 8:55 a.m., Loretta. I heard everything. Loretta's controlled expression cracked for the first time. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but with the shock of miscalculation. She'd dismissed Kellan as warehouse labor, as the quiet brother-in-law content with manual work while the ambitious family members built empires. Now he was standing in the boardroom that was supposed to finalize her triumph, and she was realizing how completely she'd misread him. Terrence turned in his chair. Kellan, how long have you been working with Dad? Since the night you stopped reading my letters, Kellan said quietly. 2 years, 7 months, 14 days. Loretta stood abruptly, dropping all pretense. She pulled out her phone with the sharp motion of someone activating a final weapon. Sign the settlement documents right now, Russell, all of you. Or the file I prepared at 9 o'clock this morning goes to the FBI, the Chronicle, and 3 federal judges, showing you as the architect of this entire fraud to cover your... Her phone screen loaded, access denied, account suspended. She stared at the display, then tried her authentication again. Same result. Her fingers moved faster, accessing backup protocols, redundant systems. Every authentication failed. Every backup returned the same message: account suspended. What did you... She looked up at me, then passed me to where Kellan stood. Kellan stepped forward from the back of the room, speaking directly to her for the first time. The error you copied from my code line 412 payload weight validation bypass. When negative weight values are input, it triggers a recursive cascade through every connected system. I weaponized it at 8:23 a.m. Every system you control, every backup you created, every encrypted file, every automated protocol frozen. Your blackmail switch never had a chance to fire. The boardroom was absolutely silent. 8:23 a.m., Loretta repeated, her voice ice, before the meeting even started. Before you walked in, confident you'd scored Dad's silence, Kellan confirmed. The code you stole was already destroying everything you built with it. Terrence sat motionless, staring at his wife and his brother, trying to process that both of them had been operating 3 moves ahead while he'd believed he was controlling the game. Phyllis had tears on her face, not grief, but something closer to pride. Her younger son, who she'd watched retreat into warehouse work after his brother sidelined him, had spent 2 years building the trap that just closed. Stanley Blackwell stood from his seat for the first time since the presentation began. His expression was not anger or surprise, but something closer to resignation, the look of a man who had run the same scheme for 30 years across Houston's logistics companies and finally encountered someone who documented every move. He placed both hands flat on the mahogany table and spoke directly to me. Russell, before your daughter-in-law has a complete breakdown and her legal representation arrives, I think we should discuss what you actually want. Stanley Blackwell did not negotiate. He picked up the unsigned merger documents at 9:30 a.m., placed them in his briefcase with the finality of a judge closing a case file, and spoke 4 words that ended 40 years of Ashford logistics. The deal is canceled. Margot Sheffield began retrieving preliminary documents. David Russo closed his laptop. The champagne bucket sat untouched, condensation pooling on napkins that would never be used. The acquisition is formally withdrawn due to material misrepresentation and criminal fraud, Stanley said. Blackwell Freight will not assume liability for systematic theft dressed as business operations. Terrence stood abruptly. Stanley, we can restructure. Give me 6 months to separate legitimate operations from the compromised divisions. Stanley raised one hand. There are no legitimate operations to separate, Terrence. Your entire revenue stream for 2 years was algorithmically fabricated. You cannot restructure what was fabricated from inception. The words landed like a verdict, not damaged worthless from the beginning. Terrence turned to his wife, searching for contradiction for strategy. Loretta, we have the operational framework. The client relationships are real. We can... Loretta stood slowly. She reached behind her neck and unclasped the diamond necklace Terrence had given her on their first anniversary, 3 carats purchased with diverted company funds. She placed it on the mahogany table. Then the platinum wedding band from their November 2019 ceremony. Then the emerald bracelet from the night she made chief operations officer. She placed them in a neat line on the mahogany table like evidence submitted to court. She looked at Terrence one final time with cold assessment. Her voice carried no anger, no grief, just flat conclusion. Useless. She walked toward the glass doors. Her heels clicked with metronomic precision, the same controlled rhythm she'd maintained through 5 years of fraud. The pneumatic hinge whispered as the door closed behind her. Terrence stood motionless, staring at the jewelry. His hands shook, not withdrawal, but the shock of watching his marriage dissolve into a single-word assessment. Phyllis sat behind me with tears tracking down her face. 25 years of blackmail secrecy had ended. Now her older son was watching his wife abandon him while federal agents waited in the hallway. The glass doors opened at 9:35 a.m. 3 federal agents entered. Agent Dylan Morris, 47, 22 years, with the FBI Economic Crimes Unit carrying arrest warrants. Agent Sarah Brennan, 39, digital forensics specialist. Agent Marcus Holbrook, 44, positioned by the exit for custody protocols. Agent Morris approached Terrence. Terrence Ashford, you are under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, computer fraud, and abuse and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Terrence did not resist. He stood, mechanically, looked at me one final time with hollow emptiness, and extended his wrists for handcuffs. The metal clicked closed. He followed Agent Holbrook toward the elevator without speaking. Agent Brennan moved toward the private exit. Ms. Ashford is attempting to leave through the executive stairwell, redirecting to the main elevator. 30 seconds later, Loretta emerged, escorted by Agent Brennan, her expression controlled even as handcuffs were applied. She was already planning a bail strategy, assessing cooperation opportunities. As the elevator doors began closing, she turned and delivered her final curse. "You destroyed this house with your own hands, old man. When you die alone, none of your children will be by your side." The elevator doors sealed shut, her voice cut off mid-syllable. The boardroom fell silent, except for climate control and distant cargo ships on the Houston Ship Channel 47 floors below. Agent Morris turned to me. "Mr. Ashford will need you to come downtown as well. Some of your evidence-gathering methods, the surveillance equipment system, access protocols, digital monitoring, require formal review before we can proceed with prosecution." Kellan stepped forward. "Is my father being charged?" "Not at this time, but we need to establish a chain of custody and ensure all collection methods comply with federal statutes." Agent Morris's tone was professional, not hostile. "Approximately 4 hours for formal questioning." He granted me 5 minutes. Kellan and I stood by the east windows overlooking Gulf Coast shipping lanes where container vessels moved like chess pieces across brown water. I had spent 40 years building Ashford Logistics from my grandfather's 200 acres and 1 freight truck, and now I was handing Kellan the deed to those same 200 acres. The only thing that survived the fire I set to burn out the corruption, while federal agents waited to question whether I had crossed legal lines to expose crimes that destroyed my family. "I read your letter from March 2023, I said quietly. "You were right about Stanley, right about Loretta, right about all of it. I was too blind to listen." Kellan's voice was steady. "You see it now. That's what matters." I pulled the folded document from my jacket, signed ownership transfer for the Hill Country property notarized this morning. 200 acres my grandfather bought in 1962, paid in full, no mortgages, no liens, no fraud. The only clean piece of our family's legacy. "This is yours," I said, handing him the deed. "Grandfather's land. Whatever happens to me, whatever they take, they can't touch this." Kellan's hand trembled after receiving it. He unfolded it, read the transfer notation, and refolded it carefully. Agent Morris knocked on the glass. "Time to leave." I placed one hand briefly on Kellan's shoulder, said nothing more, and walked toward the agents waiting by the elevator. As the elevator doors closed between us, I looked back one final time at Kellan, standing alone by the boardroom window, holding the land deed in both hands like a fragile artifact. He was 36 years old, had spent 2 years in a warehouse documenting crimes no one else would investigate, and now held the only piece of our family's 64-year legacy that wasn't stained by fraud, blackmail, or betrayal. The elevator doors sealed shut. 3 weeks after the boardroom, I stood in federal court watching Terrence Ashford, my eldest son, plead not guilty to 14 counts of wire fraud, while his court-appointed attorney shuffled papers with the exhaustion of someone defending the indefensible. The FBI questioning had taken 11 hours across 2 days. Agent Morris walked me through every piece of evidence, every surveillance timestamp, every digital access log. My methods were aggressive but legal. I'd owned the company, held administrator credentials, documented crimes occurring on systems under my authority. They granted me immunity as cooperating witness in exchange for testimony. I signed the agreement at 4:17 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, officially becoming the man who would testify against my own family. The cascade happened faster than I'd anticipated. Ashford Logistics declared Chapter 7 bankruptcy within 10 days when investors discovered the operational revenue was algorithmically fabricated. No restructuring, no asset preservation, complete liquidation. 40 years of logistics infrastructure sold for parts. Loretta was formally charged and processed at the Federal Detention Center following her arrest in the boardroom. Her bail was denied due to flight risk designation. The Nevada LLC assets, 2 commercial properties in Henderson, were frozen within 72 hours. She'd made it within 50 miles of disappearing into Monterey with 2 falsified passports and $840,000 in bearer bonds. U.S. Customs flagged her because I'd personally sent the Nevada LLC incorporation documents to Border Protection with a formal affidavit identifying her as flight risk. I didn't just expose her crimes in that boardroom, I ensured she couldn't run from them. 17 investors filed civil lawsuits seeking $63 million in damages. Most would settle for pennies on the dollar after liquidation. The Houston Chronicle ran the story on December 18, 2024. Logistics pioneer exposes son's $47 million fraud, Ashford dynasty collapses. The Business Journal followed with federal prosecutors target tech startup founders in ghost inventory scheme. By December 23rd, the Wall Street Journal published a feature, When Patriarchs Turn Prosecutors, The Cost of Family Fraud. They called me a whistleblower. Agent Morris called me a cooperating witness. My attorney called me lucky I wasn't charged as a co-conspirator. I called myself a 64-year-old man who burned down his own house to kill the termites. The reporters didn't mention that I'd signed the mortgage that funded the Aegis development, or that Kellan had sent me a warning letter 2 years ago that I ignored because I was too proud to believe my daughter-in-law was capable of systematic fraud. They saw a patriarch making a hard choice. I saw a man who'd spent 40 years building something corrupt and finally ran out of ways to pretend otherwise. 3 commercial properties were liquidated to recover investor losses, generating $8.4 million against $63 million in claims. Not enough. Never enough when the foundation was fraud. The family home, purchased in 1987, 37 years of marriage lived inside its walls, had to be sold to satisfy remaining liens. I stood in the empty living room while professional movers packed decades of accumulated life into cardboard boxes. The movers labeled boxes with brutal efficiency: living room, books, kitchen, glassware, master bedroom, personal. 37 years of marriage reduced to cardboard and packing tape, each box a chapter of a story that ended long before anyone bothered to write the final page. Phyllis arrived at 2:30 p.m. carrying 1 suitcase. She'd been staying with her sister in Clear Lake since the boardroom confrontation, letting distance create the separation we both knew was permanent. She set the suitcase down in the empty dining room where we'd hosted 17 Christmas dinners. I hired a divorce attorney. Papers will be filed after New Year. I'm sorry, Russell. For all of it, the affair, the blackmail, the 25 years of signing documents I should have refused. I nodded slowly. I understand why you signed. I wish you'd told me. We could have faced Stanley together. I was 42 and terrified. Her voice was steady, not defensive. And now I'm 67 and need to leave before more years disappear. There's nothing left to save here. No, I agreed. There isn't. No anger, no recrimination, just 2 people in an empty room recognizing their marriage had effectively ended 25 years ago when Stanley's blackmail began, and everything since had been performance maintaining the facade while the foundation rotted. The divorce paperwork was merely formalization of a relationship that stopped being real in 2000. Phyllis looked around the empty space one final time. Kellan called me yesterday. He said you transferred the Hill Country property to him. The only asset that was never contaminated. 200 acres grandfather bought in 1962. It's his now. That was the right thing to do. She picked up her suitcase. I hope you know that. Among all the destruction, that was right. She walked toward the front door, her footsteps echoing in the empty house. No embrace, no final sentiment, just a woman leaving a marriage that had been over for decades. I heard her car start in the driveway, heard the engine reverse down the concrete, heard the sound fade into Houston traffic one final time. The house fell silent except for movers working upstairs and the distant hum of afternoon heat settling over the neighborhood. I stood in the empty living room holding 2 documents, the land transfer receipt showing Kellan now owned the Hill Country property, and a handwritten letter that arrived that morning with Houston Metropolitan Detention Center as return address. Terrence had written to me from federal custody. The envelope sat unopened in my pocket for 3 hours while I decided whether some conversations should remain impossible. My daughter was facing federal charges. My son-in-law, the man I'd chosen to marry her, the man I'd trusted with operational authority, was sitting in a detention cell awaiting trial, and he'd written to me. I pulled the envelope from my jacket. The handwriting on the front was Terrence's, shakier than usual, but unmistakably his. The paper felt thin, institutional. Outside, Phyllis's car was already gone. The movers would finish by evening. Tomorrow the house will go on the market. Next week I'd move into a rental apartment in Montrose with furniture salvaged from liquidation. But first I had to decide whether to read what Terrence had written, whether some part of this devastation could still contain words worth hearing. I opened Terrence's letter that evening. 3 pages of handwritten apology, self-justification, and desperate requests for reconciliation. I read it twice, folded it back into the envelope, and filed it with the bankruptcy documents. Some conversations arrived too late to matter. When Stanley Blackwell called 32 days after the boardroom collapse, asking to meet at a cafe near the federal courthouse, my first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity about what the architect of my family's destruction wanted to say in the aftermath proved stronger than pride. The cafe was small, anonymous, the kind of place where lawyers met clients before bad news. Stanley sat at a corner table with 2 coffees already ordered, wearing a business suit that probably cost more than my weekly motel rate. He stood when I arrived, shook my hand with formal precision, and gestured to the chair across from him. Russell, thank you for coming. I sat. The coffee was still hot. He'd timed my arrival perfectly. I'll be direct, Stanley said. I want to purchase the Ashford Logistics brand and goodwill, name, reputation, existing client relationships. I'm prepared to offer $180,000. That's more than bankruptcy liquidation will yield. The offer was deliberately low. The Ashford name had carried weight in Houston logistics for 40 years. Even contaminated by fraud, the brand recognition and client relationships were worth triple that amount to someone willing to rehabilitate them. But Stanley was making an offer to a desperate seller for a damaged product, and we both knew it. I set my coffee down without drinking. The name Ashford is not for sale, Stanley. Not at any price, not to you, not to anyone. He studied my face. Even now, facing financial ruin, potential criminal liability, complete loss of the empire you built. Especially now, the name is the only thing left worth keeping. Stanley was quiet for 7 seconds. Then something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but satisfaction. Like a teacher watching a student solve a difficult problem correctly. He smiled genuinely for the first time in our 40-year acquaintance. Good, I was hoping you would say that. I waited. It was a test, Russell, not a real offer. He leaned back in his chair. 40 years ago, when my father's freight company faced bankruptcy after the 1985 oil crash, a competitor offered to buy our family name for $200,000. My father refused. I convinced him to accept, arguing that preserving capital mattered more than pride. We took the money. The competitor used our reputation to legitimize fraudulent operations for 3 years before federal prosecution. The Blackwell name became synonymous with fraud, and my father never forgave me for selling what he'd spent his life building. What does the name Ashford mean now after 40 years building logistics infrastructure, after exposing systematic fraud by my own daughter, after federal arrests and bankruptcy, liquidation and divorce papers, and newspaper headlines that will never be forgotten? It means I chose truth over preservation at the critical moment. And Stanley Blackwell, architect of family manipulation for 3 decades, somehow respected that choice more than I expected. You passed the test, I failed, Stanley said quietly. You chose to destroy the company rather than let it continue corrupt. And now you refuse to sell what's left of the name even when you have nothing else. That's the difference between us, Russell. I learned to compromise everything. You learned to burn it down instead. He pulled cash from his wallet, left it on the table for both coffees, and stood. We'll see each other again, but not as adversaries. He walked out of the cafe into January Houston heat, leaving me with untouched coffee and the strange recognition that the man who'd manipulated my family for decades somehow approved of my choice to destroy what he'd helped corrupt. That night I sat in my motel room, $340 per week, single lamp, generic furniture purchased in bulk for maximum economy. The motel room contained everything I owned. Now, 2 suitcases of clothes, land transfer receipt for Kellan's property, laptop with encrypted evidence files, court summons for tomorrow, a 64-year-old man's life, compressed to fit in 12 square feet, but somehow lighter than the mansion that required 3 moving trucks to empty. I called Kellan at 10:17 p.m. He answered immediately, the background noise of computer fans and design software. Dad, is everything okay? What are you working on at 10 o'clock at night? Redesigning the routing algorithm for the Hill Country property. His voice carried quiet enthusiasm. Pilot warehouse operation, maybe 40,000 square feet to start. Building it right this time, no shortcuts, no ghost inventory, no back doors, just clean logistics infrastructure. Remember to fix line 412, the payload weight validation bug. Kellan laughed. Already fixed. This time I won't build weapons into the foundation. This time I'll build something that doesn't need to be destroyed to be made honest. We discussed technical architecture for 15 minutes, gate logic protocols exception, handling load balancing algorithms. Not the trial, not the family destruction, not the past. Just clean systems and honest code built by someone who'd learned from watching corruption collapse. How's the land? I asked. Beautiful, quiet, no mortgages, no liens, no fraud, just 200 acres waiting for someone to build something worth building. I hung up at 10:34 p.m., set the phone on the nightstand, and lay on the motel bed looking at water-stained ceiling tiles. Somewhere 60 miles north, Kellan was probably still working on routing algorithms, designing systems that would never need congressional investigation or federal prosecution. I'd spent 40 years building Ashford Logistics from my grandfather's original land and 1 freight truck. I'd ignored my younger son's warning letter because I was too proud to believe systematic fraud could grow under my authority. I'd signed mortgages that funded the technology that destroyed us. I'd burned down everything I built to expose crimes I should have prevented. But Kellan was building something honest on the only clean land left, and for the first time in 4 months, I fell asleep without replaying mistakes. I woke at 6:47 a.m. to my phone ringing, Agent Dylan Morris calling to confirm courthouse arrival time. Through the motel window, I could see January rain falling on Houston washing yesterday's newspaper from the gutter. Somewhere 60 miles north, Kellan was probably already awake on the hill country property, designing systems that wouldn't need to be destroyed to be made honest. The trial started in 3 hours. Whatever judgment came, the clean land was already transferred. Agent Morris confirmed the courthouse arrival time, gave me final instructions about security protocols, and wished me luck with the tone of someone who'd seen too many cases go either way. The Houston Federal Courthouse steps were wet from early morning rain when Kellan and I arrived at 8:47 a.m., and the fact that my son chose to stand beside me not as witness or legal necessity, but simply as my son meant more than any verdict the court could deliver. He wasn't testifying. The prosecution had all the evidence they needed from my cooperation agreements and encrypted files. His presence served no legal purpose. But he'd driven from the hill country property that morning to walk these courthouse steps with me, and that choice said everything about what had been rebuilt through destruction. A television reporter intercepted us on the third step. Jennifer Marks' 34 Houston CBS affiliate microphone extended with the aggressive politeness of someone chasing a deadline. A cameraman positioned behind her red recording light already active. "Mr. Ashford, do you regret exposing your own daughter to federal prosecution? Do you regret destroying the company you spent 40 years building?" I paused, considering my answer carefully. Kellan stood beside me, waiting, not interfering. "I regret that it took me this long to see clearly," I said. "I regret ignoring my son's warning for 2 years. I regret signing documents without reading them because I trusted the wrong people and did not trust the right ones. I do not regret what I did with that clarity once I finally had it." The reporter opened her mouth for follow-up questions, but I walked toward the courthouse doors. Kellan stayed on the steps, meeting my eyes one final time. "I'll be right here when you come out," he said quietly. I walked through the glass doors into marble-floored silence. Behind me, I heard the reporter pivoting to Kellan for his perspective. He wouldn't give it. We'd agreed he would let me speak for myself, and he would simply be present. My footsteps on the marble courthouse floor sounded exactly like they had 40 years ago when I walked into the first warehouse I purchased. Same confident rhythm, same purposeful cadence. But then I was walking toward building something, and now I was walking toward dismantling everything I built. And somehow both journeys required the same courage, even though only one would be remembered as success. The courtroom was already filling when I arrived. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Torres, 41, handling prosecution for the Southern District of Texas, reviewing notes with methodical precision. Agent Morris seated behind the prosecution table. Court reporter positioned at her stenography machine. Gallery observers, including financial reporters and legal analysts. Judge Catherine Brennan entered at 9 a.m. sharp. U.S. District Court Judge 58, appointed in 2012 with a reputation for fair proceedings and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. Everyone stood until she took her seat. The proceedings moved with bureaucratic efficiency, review of cooperation agreements, confirmation of immunity terms, verification of evidence submission protocols. Attorney Torres summarized the case outcomes. Terrence Ashford and Loretta Ashford facing trial in March on 14 and 17 counts respectively. 17 investor lawsuits proceeding through civil court. Ashford Logistics liquidation, yielding partial recovery. At 10:34 a.m., Judge Brennan looked directly at me. "Mr. Ashford, before I make final determination regarding your cooperation agreement and any potential charges, do you wish to make a statement for the record?" My attorney had prepared 3 pages of carefully worded expressions of remorse and cooperation. I left them in my briefcase. I stood. The courtroom was silent. I looked at the ceiling, briefly ornate molding from the courthouse's 1950s construction, the kind of architectural detail meant to inspire respect for institutional justice, then back at Judge Brennan. I spent 40 years building a company. I told myself it was for my family, but somewhere along the way I confused the company with the family. I protected the company's image instead of my son's character, my family's integrity. I signed documents without reading them because I trusted the wrong people and did not trust the right ones. I ignored warnings because they were inconvenient to the story I wanted to believe. My voice stayed level, factual, no self-pity, no justification. When my son Kellan sent me that letter 2 years ago, I did nothing with that warning for 2 years. When my younger son tried to tell me about code theft and algorithmic manipulation, I dismissed him because he didn't fit my vision of success. I spent 4 decades building something I thought was legacy, and it took me until 64 years old to understand that legacy is not what you accumulate. It's what your children learn from watching how you handle the truth when it costs you everything. The courtroom remained silent for 30 seconds after I finished speaking, not the uncomfortable silence of scandal or shame, but the heavier silence of people confronting a truth they recognized but rarely named. that sometimes the most destructive thing a parent can do is protect their children from consequences, and the most loving thing is to ensure they face them. I am not here to ask for mercy, Your Honor, I concluded. I am here because the ledger needed to be balanced, and balancing it, destroying what I built in order to expose what it had become, was the first honest thing I have done as a father in a very long time. I sat down. My attorney's carefully prepared statement remained unread in my briefcase. Judge Brennan studied me for 7 seconds, her expression unreadable. 40 years of judicial experience compressed into a gaze that had evaluated thousands of defendants claiming remorse while calculating self-preservation. She knocked her gavel once. 30-minute recess before sentencing determination. The bailiff approached to escort me to the holding room. As I stood, I glimpsed Kellan through the courtroom gallery window, still there, still waiting, exactly as he promised. Whatever Judge Brennan decided in 30 minutes would determine whether I walked out those courthouse doors today or spent the next several years in federal custody. Either way, I had already said what needed to be said. The clean land was already transferred to someone who would build honestly on it. The holding room door closed behind me with institutional finality. Judge Brennan returned after 37 minutes and delivered her decision with the economical precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times. 18 months federal custody eligibility for supervised release after 11 months contingent on continued cooperation and full restitution compliance. The bailiff read the terms aloud while I counted ceiling tiles and thought about how a sentence sounds nothing like what it feels like when the cuffs close. Not mercy, accountability. There is a distinction, and Judge Brennan made certain I understood which one she was handing me. 4 months into my sentence at the minimum security facility outside Austin, the days developed their own rhythm: breakfast at 6, supervised work detail at 7, correspondence review at 2, lights out at 10. The compound held 41 men, most of them white collar, most of them surprised to be there. I was not surprised. That absence of surprise was the only thing separating me from the others. The facility allowed supervised tablet access 3 hours per day. I used mine to review Kellan's architectural plans. He sent updated drawings every Tuesday. Warehouse schematics, foundations, specifications, drainage mapping for the hill country property. Each revision was cleaner than the last, refined, thought through, the work of someone who had learned to trust the process instead of shortcutting it. I read every page before the session timer expired, then sat with the tablet dark on my knee, trying to memorize details I could hold through the week. It was the most useful thing I had done in decades. During his first supervised visit 3 weeks after sentencing, Kellan described the morning he walked the property boundary with Conrad Redmond at first light. He told it the way he tells everything, quietly, without performance, letting the details carry the weight. He said the limestone outcroppings were still frosted when they started. January in the hill country. They walked the full perimeter before the sun cleared the eastern ridge, Conrad marking survey flags where the pilot warehouse footprint would go, Kellan holding the tablet with the routing diagrams open against the gray morning sky. Conrad had asked one question when they finished the walk: how long before it's operational? Kellan said 14 months if permitting moved on schedule, 18 if it did not. Conrad had nodded once, pulled a survey flag from the frozen ground to reposition it 6 feet north, and said, "Let's plan for 18 and be ready at 14. That is Conrad's version of optimism. Kellan said he has grown to trust it completely. The pilot warehouse footprint covers 40,000 square feet in the property's northeast quadrant, positioned to maximize road access while preserving the old mesquite grove along the western fence line that my grandfather planted in 1971. Kellan kept the trees. He said he kept them because they were there before any of us and would be there after all of us. And a logistics operation that cannot root around 200 mesquite trees is not a logistics operation worth running. I told him that was the most sensible thing any Ashford had said in 30 years. The routing algorithm underneath the operation is entirely his, rebuilt from foundational principles. No shortcuts, no borrowed architecture, no legacy code borrowed from a filing cabinet without permission. He showed me the core logic during the second visit. Sat across from me at the bolted-down table in the visitation room, angled the tablet so the overhead light did not wash out the screen, and walked me through each module, the way he used to walk me through ideas in the garage when he was 22 and I was still listening. The gate logic adapts in real time. Weather delay upstream triggers automatic recalculation downstream, no manual override required. Loading variants of 15% or more flags automatically for supervisor review rather than silent system adjustment. Every discrepancy leaves a time-stamped record that no administrator, including Kellan himself, can retroactively modify. He built accountability into the foundation, structurally, not as a policy, not as a procedure, but as a technical impossibility to remove. I did not tell him I recognized that as a deliberate architectural choice. I did not tell him it was the same instinct that made me send that anonymous brief to Stanley Blackwell's attorney 2 years ago before any of this started, the refusal to let wrong math stand because the consequences of wrong math kill people. He inherited that instinct. He built it into every system he designs. Some inheritance survives even the worst stewardship. On a Tuesday in late February, Kellan's weekly drawings arrived with a photograph attached a JPEG of the framed photograph I had sent him from my personal effects mounted on the container office wall beside the warehouse blueprint. The 1984 photograph me at the original Ashford Logistics opening, 30 years younger, standing in front of a corrugated steel building in work clothes that did not fit quite right because I had bought them the day before and not had time to break them in. Below the photograph, Kellan had taped a note card, handwritten. Same careful script as the letter I found in the filing cabinet. 4 words. Same start, better foundation. I kept the photograph on my tablet as the lock screen for 6 weeks until the facility's IT administrator told me personal photographs were not permitted as lock screen images. I changed it back to the default. But I had memorized the note card by then. Kellan told me about Stanley Blackwell's message during the March visit. Described it without drama the way he describes most things. An unknown number. 7:43 in the morning. 4 sentences about the pilot warehouse concept and partnership opportunities. The signature SB. He said his immediate response was not anger or wariness, but something closer to clarity. He had watched Stanley operate for 2 years from warehouse loading docks and server logs. He understood the pattern, identify the ambition, find the pressure point, offer the bridge, collect the toll. Stanley had run the same sequence across 3 Houston logistics generations. He had moved now to a 4th. Kellan had typed his reply before Conrad finished reading the message over his shoulder. Come see the land. We talk after you understand what is being built here. He told me he did not phrase it as a rejection. He phrased it as a precondition. Stanley could come. Stanley could look. But the conversation would happen on land that Kellan understood at a cellular level in front of systems he designed himself on terms established before any offer arrived. Will you meet with him? I asked. Yes, Kellan said. But I will read the entire contract before anything else happens. Every clause, every definition, every exhibit. He said it simply like it was obvious, because for him, after everything, it is obvious. I thought about the Tuesday afternoon I sat across from Gordon Reeves in an air-conditioned office and signed 4 pages, because the coffee was good, and Gordon had been my attorney for 20 years, and it only took 5 minutes. I thought about every document I had moved through my life at the speed of trust, rather than the speed of scrutiny. Kellan will not do that, not because he was told not to, because he watched what happens when you do, and he is the kind of man who learns from watching. 7 months remain on my sentence. The facility allows 1 telephone call per week. I use mine on Sunday evenings after the work detail and before lights out when the common room is quiet and the line has no wait. Kellan usually answers before the 2nd ring. We rarely discuss the trial. We rarely discuss Terrence, who entered a plea agreement in March and is serving 31 months at a facility in Beaumont. We rarely discuss Loretta, whose cooperation with federal prosecutors is ongoing in ways I am not permitted to know. We rarely discuss what was lost or why. We discuss load balancing, permitting timelines, whether the Eastern Approach Road needs to be graded before the first contractor arrival, whether 40,000 square feet is the right initial footprint or whether Kellan should build to 60,000. And lease the surplus until volume catches up. These are the conversations I should have been having with him for 20 years. The trial was not where redemption happened. Redemption is not a verdict. Redemption is a Sunday phone call about foundation drainage and whether the mesquite trees along the western fence will interfere with the access road in 30 years. I have 7 months remaining. Kellan has 200 acres of unencumbered limestone and the architectural discipline to build honestly on it. That exchange my months for his foundation is the only ledger entry that matters now. The facility lights dim at 10. I fold the tablet drawings into the binder I keep under the bunk lie back and think about the access road and the mesquite trees. I think Kellan will keep the trees. I think he will route around them. That is the right choice. That is the Ashford choice finally after everything. The Ashford name will mean something again, not because I rebuilt it, but because Kellan never had to. And to you listening to my story, remember this. The hardest choices often look like destruction before they reveal themselves as redemption. I spent 40 years building an empire, but I was building it on assumptions I never questioned. I signed documents without reading them because I trusted the wrong people. I ignored my younger son's warnings because he didn't fit my definition of success. Don't make my mistake. Trust is earned through transparency, not titles. Family loyalty doesn't mean protecting people from consequences. It means ensuring they face them. This story, like many family betrayal revenge stories, isn't about winning. It's about choosing integrity when it costs everything. You've probably read similar family Reddit stories where someone discovers fraud and deception. The question is whether you preserve the corruption or expose it. I chose exposure, and it destroyed my company, my marriage, and my relationship with my daughter. But it freed my son to build honestly on clean ground. I believe God allowed this pain to teach me that legacy isn't what you accumulate, it's what your children learn from watching how you handle truth when it demands sacrifice. If this story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a comment below. Tell me, would you have made the same choice? Have you faced a similar family betrayal revenge situation where loyalty and truth collided? Your perspective helps others navigate these impossible decisions. Please consider sharing this with someone who needs to hear it, and if you appreciate these family Reddit stories, subscribe to Dad's Silent Revenge for more. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Just a reminder, while based on real themes, certain details have been fictionalized for storytelling. What matters is the lesson, and I hope it stays with you.